Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Redemption in a Worthy World in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 31, Operation Harmony PT3, A Meeting of the Minds. Sasuke was pretty sure he was asleep. Pretty sure because only minutes before he'd been standing in the streets of the Uchiha district, forced to watch as his brother killed every member of his clan, then his father and mother. Their father and mother. And now he wasn't. Now he was standing on the surface of a vast plain of water and watching as black spiked chains rose from the depths to disappear into the shadows above his head. Weird, he said to no one. Not by a long shot. Sasuke froze as he heard something lick its lips behind him and make several exaggerated smacking noises. Compared to the wonderful meal you just provided me, your shared consciousness is positively placid. In the back of Sasuke's head, the primal Uchiha instinct to fight warred with the primal human instinct to survive as he refused to look behind him. This had to be another nightmare. In nightmares you were always unable to look at the thing coming up behind you. Even if it ate him, he would at least wake up from a nightmare that wasn't attack-focused. Even a hideous trauma will become normalized if one dreams it every night for a year. Except he hadn't. Sasuke stared down at the water and the chains as something clicked in his brain. Something he'd said to Naruto months and months ago. Since that rain-soaked fight in Naruto's apartment, they had fallen asleep under the same roof, mostly. And every night since then, the nightmares had been gone. Except he'd had one just now. The vaunted Uchiha genius at work finally figured it out. There was a dark chuckle that was less mirth than derision mixed with loathing. Yes, you've given me such wonderful nightmares to feast on. Giving me strength. Giving me power. Ripples spread on the lake as they passed under Sasuke's feet and he felt hot breath on the back of his neck. Across his entire back really. For that alone, I'll let you live. And in turn, you will help me live. If the stories his mother and his grandmother and the clan scrolls had told contained one common theme, it was this: absolutely never, ever make deals with demons, spirits, or oni of any shape. Why Yuri sealed, he heard himself say. You were sealed inside Naruto by the fourth Hokage. Do not speak that name. By the fourth Hokage, continued Sasuke as he felt something snap violently behind him and made his hair ripple with the force. You can't get free, you can't live anywhere, except inside Naruto. And Naruto's a good person, so he's never going to let you out no matter what. No matter what? Crooned the nine-tailed fox in a voice dripping with amusement and the knowledge of secrets. Why, as it so happens, a very familiar brazen Uchiha missing an arm and an eye told me a great many things that might just convince the Uzumaki to open the door all on his own. Such wonderful secrets he entrusted to the wicked nine-tailed fox, but not to you. Where should I start, foolish little brat? Foolish little brother, you're not even worth killing. Sasuke screwed up his eyes and balled his fists. Itachi didn't get to scare him now. Not when the nine-tailed fox was somehow inside his head, outside of Naruto. But I still am, and it's only thanks to your curious little connections that I was ever able to even feast on your fears in the first place. The bonds of destiny, it mused. Uchiha and Senju. Uzumaki and Uchiha. Harano and Uzumaki and Uchiha, all twisted and torn. At least from here I'll have a front row seat. It was teasing him, goading him. It wanted him to turn around, to attack it, to make a mistake. Perhaps there was some invisible rule that protected him now, something the fox didn't want him to know, but couldn't break himself. But the fox wanted something from him, had admitted it. In turn you will help me live. All right then, called Sasuke, and he was proud his voice only shook a little. So if you eat my dreams about Itachi, that's it? You're not eating my soul. A displeased rumble from behind him shook the water again. Tempting, admittedly, but the old man wouldn't approve. He always had a soft spot for children, same with Madatabi and Kome. No, the seal that binds me to Naruto prevents any other from passing beyond my infernal cage. Unless, of course, you walk in on your own. Sensing the fox was leading him away towards irrelevancies, Sasuke kept pushing. You wanted me to help you live, what does that mean? It is a simple deal, as I have said. I devour your dreams and in return, you will convince the specs that call themselves shinobi to let me dreamwalk as I please. Because of your sloth and my hunger for sustenance, we have tipped our hand. If I am not there to devour your dreams, they will come crashing down upon you all at once and shatter your soul beyond repair. Sasuke blinked and forced his body to calmly sit down on the water as he digested this. The fox sounded almost regretful. It was likely a trick, no, almost certainly a trick. The nine-tailed fox was a beast of calamitous and indiscriminate wrath that humans had harnessed without incident for years save one. And that incident had cost the lives of dozens of shinobi and the fourth Hokage. It was a creature of hatred and malice, he could feel it behind him. Anything else was impossible. This is purely out of self-interest, it said, and Sasuke cocked his head as he listened. I shall drink in your suffering to restore my balance, and you shall convince the mortals to let me do so. Even if it is only to save your own wretched Uchiha hide. It was trying to convince itself as much as it was trying to convince him. Sasuke felt the corners of his lips twitch and he slapped his hands over his mouth before the fox could even sense the expression on his face. Besides, said the fox, at this moment you will be a convenient messenger from the Biju to the Uchiha who calls himself your uncle. Tell him that 6 of the 9 are ready. Tell him we will not fail the old man, just as he will not fail the old man, or we will devour him. Tell him that we will fight, when the day comes, at the end of all things, when the gate yawns wide. He felt a vast claw scrape down his shirt before it lowered and a massive paw shoved him into the water. He began to sink, even as he clawed in the direction of the surface and the slitted red eyes that glowed there, so much like his own. There were so many other questions he wanted to ask, so many things the fox had said. He didn't even know how to find Indra. Follow the chains, idiot boy. Tell him our message, then help me live. That is our bargain. Before he sank out of sight, Sasuke thought he could see the gleaming fangs of a smile. Indra looked out over the lake and forests of his soul and knew with a bone-deep certainty that he was going to hate this place before all was said and done. Of course, given the number of broken bones he probably had, bone-deep certainty didn't go quite as deep as it normally did, so natch. In his first life, when he'd been an international terrorist, a commander, a hero, and a shitty father, he'd visited the depths of his soul perhaps 6 times. Most of those had been Naruto's fault. It hadn't even been a year and he knew he would break that record before December. He looked around as he heard muffled screaming, then down as bubbles began to rise from between his legs, so he scooched back just in time for Sasuke Uchiha to fly headfirst out of the lake of their linked souls, screaming at the top of his lungs. He flipped several times as he tumbled through the air, arms and legs scrabbling for purchase until he landed flat on his back with a painful-sounding smack. Indra winced, because that sounded like it hurt, and unfurled into a standing position to offer the younger version himself a hand up. So I'll admit, I wasn't expecting you to show up, Sasuke. Considering I was knocked out, I thought old man Hagi Oromo was going to be here with some sage wisdom, maybe a new eyeball again. Sasuke took his uncle's hand and allowed himself to be hauled into a standing position as he picked the only concrete fragment out of the man's gibbering. I'm in your head. Yes. So, you can get into mine. Indra looked slightly guilty and Sasuke could tell because he made the same Uchiha expression. Only if it's an emergency. The smaller Uchiha frowned and crossed his arms. You mean like if there's a 9-tailed fox eating my dreams? Yeah. Because that happened, and I'm blaming you. To his satisfaction, Indra staggered backwards like Sasuke had just shot him with another arrow. How do you find OU dash? The man didn't even finish the question before he answered it himself with a grim look. Him. Right. Sasuke nodded. You fell asleep during the day, while Naruto was still awake. Another nod as Indra began pacing back and forth across the water, hand cradling his chin in deep thought. Mutterings spilled from his lips about Ashura's link and bonded disturbances and damned Uzumaki seals, and Sasuke tried to make sense of them, but he was drowning in words and information and secrets and The boy buried his head in his hands, mirroring his position in the waking world. This sucks. I get a new friend, but he's got a fox spirit that's eating my dreams. I get another Uchiha, but he's got all these secrets and now is sharing my head. I find out my mom was an awesome jonin, but she used to date Naruto's mom. What next? Huh. Indra looked blank, so Sasuke grabbed his cloak and pulled the man down to his level. I asked you, in the hospital, I asked you if you had any more secrets you wanted to spill and you said no. Did you know the fox was in my head? Okay Indra, moment of truth. Time for some good parenting. He dug deep and came up with nothing. The books hadn't covered malicious chakra constructs with a hatred for Uchiha. The well-thumbed chapter on managing divorce didn't count, so he fell back on what had become the Attaka principle: think of what Attaka would do, then do the exact opposite. Not then. The first night I slept in the Uchiha district, I was messing around in my head dash. Like now. Yes, lied Indra. Back then he had more guilt and more ribs. Then I followed my sins down and ended up at your head, where I saw the nine-tailed fox eating your nightmares. Why would your sins lead you to my head? A very, very good question. And he'd promised not to lie. Attaka principle. Shared trauma, mystical chakra, some guesswork that would take a licensed therapist to confirm, or a Yamanaka with a stiff drink. Sasuke was wrong-footed momentarily, so as his grip eased, Indra sank back into the lotus position in front of his younger self and continued the story. Seeing a giant fox inside your head, I panicked a little and invited myself in to confront the Biju. We fought, it threatened your soul, I threatened it with eternal prison and listening to Naruto sing the ramen song for the rest of his days. You know. Sasuke shivered. A horrible punishment indeed, no wonder the fox hadn't eaten him earlier. So perhaps I was a fool for not telling you, but I was afraid that if you knew, you would try to fight him all on your own and then he certainly would have eaten you, ramen song or not. You fought him though. I have an eternal Mangekyo Sharinan and knowledge of the 9 Biju very few know. We came to an understanding. I think we did too. Now Indra was the one frowning. Elaborate. So Sasuke told him about falling asleep, about the horror and pain as the nightmares that had been absent so long came roaring back and how the fox had been there, and they had just vanished. Right down the fanged gullet. Then he relayed the creature's taunts, its offered bargain, and its message to Indra last of all. He had expected Indra to be angry, disappointed, or worried, but instead, the man's face broke out into a small smile and a small golden sun began to peek across the horizon of his mind. I had only dared to hope. He trailed off as he rose into a standing position and Sasuke scrambled to follow him as he strode towards the sun, which brightened their surroundings with every step he took. 6 of the 9, he said, tasting the words as they passed his lips. Now that is worth a few ribs. Sasuke, you have brought us joyous news today. He laughed suddenly and hoisted Sasuke above his head to deposit the boy on his shoulders, even though he should have been too old, or too heavy for such things. 6 of the 9, Sasuke, 6 of the 9 Biju have agreed to fight with us puny mortals. What a sight that will be to behold. He swung around in something that might have been a dance and Sasuke found himself grinning, clinging tighter to his uncle's forehead as his center of gravity flew this way and that. Indra was almost singing. Amaterasu Okamai, divine goddess, and mother to us all. You have protected us from harm and given us the wisdom to succeed today. Beautiful goddess who cannot fail, bring light to our blinded eyes, so that we may see your glory once more. Let your people grow old and know peace. The older and the younger Uchiha stood there as the son of Indra's soul, its hope, and its love and everything that had spurred him on, through time and pain and loss, rose again. The moon could only ever reflect the light of the sun. But now, they shared the same sky. Far away, in the grip of a massive stone golem, surrounded by battle and death, Indra Uchiha opened his eye and smiled a bloody, crooked smile as he felt the rain on his face wash away the blood. He felt Jirobo's power, leeching the chakra from him, drawing it endlessly into itself, seeking to fill a void that could never be sated. The barest genetic remnant of one path of the Rinnegan's potential. He almost pitied the teenager's endless hunger. Indra spat out a false tooth as the howling mass of black flame and iron in front of him collapsed to the ground to reveal the red-haired teenager and final wrapped form of her summoned demon. You know, he said almost conversationally, this might be a minor setback for me. Well done. His hand sparked with lightning chakra and the clouds roared in response as something vast emerged from within the thunder clouds to peer down at the battlefield. Some of the more religious sound ninja fled, and a few dropped to their knees at what could only be divine judgment for their many sins under Orochimaru's rule. If anybody in Umbu has the brains they were born with, he shouted, ignoring the way something sharp jabbed inside of him, You should hit the deck. He heard the strains of flute music and the final demon split open, pale mouths racing to devour his soul with Revolt of the Demon World, but it was futile. Though he'd once called it Indra's Arrow, he returned to its first title as lightning descended upon the battlefield in 1/1000th of a second. Kirin. The world went white with sound and fury. Despite his many attempts, Indra had never been able to mold Kirin into a jutsu with even a shred of his ex-wife's finesse. While she could find and separate a blood clot in the veins of an old man without breaking the skin, he could put a hole through two men and the wall behind them. In a similar manner, a ninja with his ex-wife's talent at controlling chakra, or even his husband's skill with nature energy could have accomplished his goal. They could have split the raw untamed lightning further and further, dividing it into dozens or hundreds of falling spears of energy across a battlefield. Spears to kill, spears to shock, or spears to revitalize a dying comrade. The potential, Sakura had liked to say as they stared out over another smoking wasteland, was endless. But Indra was both a dramatic bastard and, compared to them, a moron on the subject of nature energy. So he shaped the lightning into a dragon and simply terraformed 100 yards of sound-owned forest into a new crater. As it turned out, the combatants were incredibly lucky, because Jirobo was even more incredibly stupid than Indra. As the raw energy hit the top of his stone golem and vaporized it in a flash of raw chakra and heat, his endless hunger surged forth to meet it. All his life, Jirobo had hungered for more food, for more power, for more chakra, and here at last, he began to feel full. Fully half of the energy that had sundered the Uchiha clan's ancient fortress or carved through Naruto's Biju chakra mode was absorbed or diverted by the teenager's genetic hunger and the cursed seal that fed it. Even as the lightning reached the center of his golem and began to boil the moisture inside his body, Jirobo had an instant of satisfaction as the hunger within was finally sated. Then he was on fire and everything hurt. Indra stood near the center of the blast radius, mostly unharmed as stray charges crawled across his upraised hand and curled around his shoulders in twisting energy. He idly formed the charges into miniature dragons and channeled them down to his hand and through the air to his sword, lying abandoned just outside the furrow in the earth he had been in a few minutes ago. Positive and negative charges flared as the seal Kirin had carved on his 30th birthday reacted and the hilt flew swiftly into the palm of his hand. He blinked a few times to clear the remaining spots from his vision and whistled in surprise as he surveyed the area. Much less devastation than normal, and he saw a few shinobi of varying allegiances pick themselves up shakily from the edges of the blast wave. All right, I'll admit it, Jirobo, that was also impressive. A shame you're still able to feel though. He was about to bring his sword down on the wailing mass of burns that had been a sound shinobi when surprisingly small arms wrapped around his chest and he was thrown backwards into a textbook suplex. His sword was wrenched out of his hand even as he tucked his head and rolled to avoid a crushed skull or a broken neck. Ninja wrestling as Sakura's 29th birthday present had been surprisingly educational and unsurprisingly painful. His minor success was followed by a kick that hammered into his side and sent him rolling away from Jirobo. He rolled to his feet and noticed what remained of his cape was no longer on fire. His hand went to his neck and he breathed a sigh of relief. His scarf may have been covered in dirt and, if he was unlucky, a little blood, but it was still in one piece. He sent a crooked grin in the direction of Teiwa, whose diminutive form had already receded to that of a normal human, as she breathed a thin mist of water across her comrade and doused the fire. The fury in her expression reminded Indra of his Naruto and he snapped his fingers as the realization dawned on him. I can't believe I never noticed, he said brightly, then winced as the speech pained him. Yep, broken jaw. Joy. You're another Uzumaki, and Orochimaru never noticed. You know, for a day I thought was going to be entirely horrible fights, unpleasant surprises, and snakes, it's really been quite nice. What the fuck are you talking about? Hissed the girl, but her expression had shifted from pure hate into a warier, guarded expression as she clung to her flute. Indra attempted his best charming smile, the one that according to Sakura, Naruto, and Kirin had a chance on any sufficiently interested idiot. If two of the Uzumaki had fallen for it at one point or another, then perhaps. Teiwa was looking at him like he'd gone mad. Ow, 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 broken jaw. He let the smile drop away. If it means anything to you and that ancestral flute of yours, I've got a friend in the Leaf Village who'd love to meet you, and not in the torture and interrogation kind of way. You know, short, feisty temper, long life, can take a real beating, massive chakra reserves. Uzumaki through and through, Umbu's honor. A hooded Umbu dropped down beside him and removed its mouse mask to reveal Anko Mise Hitari and her cheery grin as she slapped his stump with what must have been admiration. Now, that was one hell of a jutsu, where'd you learn that? The Sound Village. Alright fine, don't tell me. So is this that girl you wanted us to capture? Red hair, short, angry. Indra shook his head and jerked his thumb at the teenager who was attempting to haul the combined weight of Jirobo, Seikon, and Kimimaro onto her shoulders. Nope, that's Uzumaki number 2. Never even realized she fit the profile until we were fighting, so the gods are finally giving us a break. Anko pursed her lips and examined the struggling teenager as she flipped a kunao end over end. Yeah, I can see it. Nice catch. Fuck off and die, spat Tewia, but Anko only waved. Not until your boss does. You know, you'd really stand a better chance if you just ran for it. A stream of curses across 4 languages and what Indra recognized as scattered words of Uzushio's ancient tongue spilled from her lips, and he silently hoped the god's generosity would extend to those, because that third one had sounded nasty. So, Mouse, where do we stand? Anko pulled a small scroll from within her robe and unrolled it as they kept the Sound Ninja in their vision. Northern hideouts secure, same as the east. West was a close one and I'm willing to bet we missed a few there. Last message had Stone Ninja were inbound, along with the Tushikage, so I marked that as yellow until we hear more. If we hear more. I have every faith that my operatives were able to extract themselves successfully, remarked Danzo as he limped towards them from the edge of the larger clearing Indra had created. It is not the first time we have acquired high-value targets under the Tushikage's nose, after all. For Umbu, or for Root? Asked Indra, while Anko started producing bandages, vials, and surgical gauze from her robe. Sir, you're bleeding. This was either stating the obvious or missing the point entirely, as Danzo was covered head to toe in blood and Indra had no idea how much of it was his own. The leader of the Umbu looked at him impassively and Indra wobbled on his feet as multiple broken ribs and a shattered jaw threatened his stubborn hold on the conscious world. But he wasn't going to allow himself to collapse an instant before Danzo, and certainly not before he held Orochimaru's head in his hands. The snake? He asked, as his right leg began to jitter from too many chakra-assisted jumps. Or perhaps it was the poison on the 3 senbon needles that were still stuck in his back. He mentioned this to Anko, who peered around and actually licked the area in question. Yep, poisoned for sure. Good news is, only one of M's still in you, but bad news, flying into a tree didn't do you any favors, it's stuck in there real good. How far? Said Indra as his eye scanned the tree line and he willed himself not to collapse. Think about Sasuke. And Naruto, and Sakura, and Kakashi and Inoichi and Kat. You are not going to fall over until Orochimaru has the common decency to die. Anko continued. Really deep, like, all the way in there. If you want my professional medical opinion, and my experience with my old master, I'd say leave it in. Well, isn't this a wonderful surprise, said a voice from the trees. All my favorite people here in one place for me to kill save Sarutobi-sensei, and most of them are half dead already. Sibilant words, undercut with cold fury, and the promise of poison. It was undoubtedly Orochimaru. My old student, returned for her final exam, I think I'll kill you last. And Shimura Danzo, my second master, who threw me to Konoha's wolves when it was convenient. I so dearly want you to be first in line, but that honor must go to another today. And Indra Uchiha. The snake hissed his name with such loathing Indra was faintly surprised the trees didn't burst into flames anew. The man who knows more than he should, with a single eye, a single arm, by all accounts a weakling among the Uchiha, robbed of his sight by my old teammates of that organization. The obvious bait he knew I could not resist, and the offer he provided which was so tempting I simply had to hear him out. So very clever. So very foolish. I will kill you now. Indra's sword flew to his hand as the white 8-headed serpent of the 8 branches technique exploded from the tree line alongside a dozen or so Sound Ninja. The majority of the latter landed in front of Tewia and several of them helped carry the unconscious bodies of the Sound Ninja 4 onto their shoulders. Kodomaru's enormous spider crawled forth from the summoning smoke beneath him, and the spider mimic soon rained hardened daggers and massive arrows down upon any Umbu from his heightened position. But Indra had eyes only for Orochimaru, crawling his way from the throat of his most powerful creation and covered in slime. The brief lull in the fighting Indra had caused was over, and now was the moment the battle would be decided. Either the summoned creatures would break through the tattered Umbu line and escape into the forest, or they would be overwhelmed, and Orochimaru's sound village would die along with its Otokage. Anko drew a handful of senbon and rolled the poisoned weapons across her knuckles in a fierce anticipatory grin. "Any inspirational words for the troops, sirs, before we're swallowed whole by a white snake?" Indra pointed his sword at the serpent and said nothing more. For him, there was nothing left to say. But apparently Danzo felt differently. "Kill him quickly," said the leader of Root as he brandished his tree branch, "and make it hurt." Neither Anko or Indra were particularly good Umbu agents, and they would have been hopeless en route, but they followed this order with zeal. As they advanced to meet the wall of flesh and scales, the snakes spat poison down at them and some of the heads lashed out, driving new openings into the underground sound complex. Indra kept the acrobatics to a minimum and simply charged straight forward, pushing Chakra through his sword even as he pushed himself to stay conscious. Anko was all around him, flinging senbon into exposed golden eyes, kicking at their sensitive nostrils, or sending snakes of her own from her sleeves to entangle them for a few precious seconds. Danzo didn't even bother to put the blood on his thumb and slammed his hands against his bloody frame to summon his own elephantine creature to the field. Another massive plume of smoke that hid the ragged lines from one another as they met. Indra had only seen the Baki briefly in his first life, before he'd caused it to choke on a fireball, but it was magnificent. Claws slammed into the ground, crushing a sound ninja beneath them as the beast put its shoulder into the eight-headed serpent and brought the thing to a grinding halt. Two heads hissed in displeasure and made to attack, only for the creature to open its vast mouth and inhale. A powerful suction force tossed every ninja in front of it into the air and uprooted several weakened trees behind them. The heads were pulled forwards too, though their muscles struggled against the Baki's pull uselessly. Once they were in its mouth, the creature bit down hard, causing the heads to spasm as their spines were severed and the stumps recoiled as other heads received signals of pain and death. Danzo gestured from the head of his summon and the Baki moved in closer even as several more heads sank poisoned fangs into its body in retaliation. Indra and Anko were not allowing the old man to show them up, jumping higher along the necks of the heads that lunged at them. His sword flashed in the afternoon light as the lightning elongated blade of the Chidori sharp spear extended to sever them. 3. 4. 5. Orochimaru was down to 3 heads and Anko juked sideways as his sword shot forward, then swung wide in search of her flesh, then Indra's on the backswing. "Sorry master," she called, not sounding sorry at all as she launched volley after volley of ninja tools in his direction. "You've fallen behind the times and the Leaf can't have someone as crass as you soiling our reputation. Imagine how hard it's been for me to find a date." A white head interposed itself and the rain of senbon, kunao, shuriken, miniature snakes, and dango sticks bounced off its scaly hide as it spat a return volley of venom at her. "And this dreadful tattoo has got to go most of all," said Anko as the venom splashed over her cloak, which she discarded instantly, revealing her usual combination of beige clothing and questionably respectable fishnets. "I can't imagine why," commented Indra as he shoved Kusanagi to the side in a sloppy parry. "Perhaps it's because you're wearing protective ninja underwear as normal clothes. My parenting books say the clothes you choose shape the attention you receive." "Parenting books," was all Anko got out before she dove headfirst down the white snake's throat, bypassing its fangs entirely and whooping on the way down. Yes, I'd wondered if we'd return to that subject," crooned Orochimaru in satisfaction at having a rumor confirmed. A fledgling Uchiha with 2 precious undeveloped eyes, a civilian girl with a talent for genjutsu, and the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki. Indra said nothing as his mouth pressed into a tighter and tighter line, lips growing white as the pain continued to increase. Now there was a voice in his head that sounded like Sakura, lecturing him in a worried because I care voice about internal bleeding, bone shards, and puncture wounds. He kept going as the Naruto voice joined in and Orochimaru and his sword kept prodding. "They were the talk of the village before you woke up, you know. Marched to the Hokage in ceremonial armor and caused quite a stir. The little bird had wondered if the village was really as safe as everyone had said it would be. Especially because you helped attack and slaughter his whole clan. Or have you not told him yet? A wide, self-satisfied grin spread across his face as Indra cleaved the second head down the middle as it rushed forward and the blood washed over his ankles. The last head looked dismayed as it realized it was the only living head atop an increasingly gory carcass. The Uchiha tried to wink at the snake and at Orochimaru, forcing his lips into a smile. "Wide off the mark, I'm afraid," he said, aiming for casual banter and instead sounding like a gust of wind would blow him over. "I guess whichever little snake managed to hide away in the Leaf Village isn't quite as good as they pretend to be." Orochimaru's face twisted into something hungry and full of naked fury as he charged, and Indra brought his blade into a guard position to meet him. The last, and first, and only time he'd killed Orochimaru in his first life, Indra had taken his master's words to heart. He'd cheated. Misdirection and subterfuge to draw Kabuto away, psychological warfare and patience as weakness revealed itself, as Orochimaru's body weakened and the moment approached when he would plunge into the body of Sasuke Uchiha and subsume his mind. Chidori-based ninjutsu to weaken his body still further as the third Hokage's final act had eaten away at the very idea of Orochimaru's arms. A moment of genuine fear as the serpent dragon Orochimaru had molded his soul into was revealed in all its monstrosity. Growing confidence as he felt the genjutsu and the soporific gas supposedly weaken his mind, and Orochimaru reared to strike Indra down inside his own mind. Then, his Sharingan turned the tables, elegantly, smoothly, in a burst of genjutsu and long-suppressed hatred. Standing there in the room surrounded by the corpses of the monster that had been his master while a shrieking voice was buried inside his mind, Indra had allowed himself the dark satisfaction of a job finished. None of that existed now, in any way Indra could have wished for. He only had a single Sharingan and his limbs shook each time the blocked Orochimaru's strikes. He was exhausted, low on chakra, and hurt. Orochimaru was angry, and for all he could see, unmarred by weakness or wounds. But Danzo and Kat had harmed him, carved through body after body, forcing him to shed his skin over and over, to waste more and more chakra just to survive their pursuit. Blades of steel and wind had driven him to ground, and though he could have escaped, Indra had been right that the three of them, Danzo, Anko, and himself, would draw him back. Indra had drawn him in, Anko had goaded him, and Danzo had made his measly hideouts collapse around his ears. He had little to lose now, other than his life, so Orochimaru fought with the strength, speed, and skill in Kenjutsu that reminded Indra over and over the man had once been a legendary Sannin. But Indra kept going, blocking each strike even as he slid away on the surface of the white snake, retaliating with every scrap of his own trickery and remaining ninja tools. Shuriken on razor wire surrounded Orochimaru, crackling with lightning, and the swordsman dodged and weaved through them. Small fireballs spat from Indra's lips to set his hair in mask aflame, obscuring his vision and ruining his disguise. The man beneath was covered from the scars of Orochimaru's adoptive surgery, but those golden eyes, framed by purple clan markings, still gazed out. In the instant it took for Orochimaru to rip the mask free from his vision, Indra was inside his guard, cleaving downward with a roar of effort. Kusanagi and the pale arm that held it fell away and out of view as it skittered down the side of the summoned corpse. The Uchiha felt a brief moment of triumph before Orochimaru's other arm wrapped around his throat and his fangs pierced Indra's neck. In that frozen moment, the most Indra could manage was, "I really hope he missed my jugular," followed by, "He absolutely didn't." Then a tree branch came into view, followed by Shimura Danzo's face in its grim serenity. The heavy wooden knot at the end of the branch slammed into Orochimaru's face with the assistance of a Chunin-ranked wind enhancement jutsu, and the snake Sannin stumbled backwards, fangs shattered, and borrowed features ruined. Indra's blade rose and Kat's blade descended as Orochimaru's decapitation of Beetle was returned with interest and in the shape of forged steel. He hadn't even had time to scream. Moments after the snake sage died, his opponent slumped forwards and both Kat and Danzo, to their mutual astonishment, reached out to catch him. They lowered him onto the scales of the thing that was 87.5% dead and felt for a heartbeat. Thump thump. Thump thump. Kat realized she was shaking as the adrenaline rush left her body. "Thank the gods he's alive." Her commander grunted something vaguely approving, which was close enough as the final massive snake reared up with bared fangs and Umbu below shouted in warning. Suddenly the thing exploded from within with a massive detonation of gore, colored smoke, and confetti. "Ah shit, grumbled Anko as she picked her way from the corpse and glittered confetti floated into the hair of everyone present. I mixed up the surprise party seals with the delayed charge explosive seals. Auntie's going to kill me. Sasuke had swam back and forth between his mind and Indra's several times until he'd gotten bored and wandered around the shore of his uncle's mind, kicking around interesting pebbles and shells. Doubtless Inoichi Yamanaka would have a great deal to say about some of the vaguely phallic shapes, but to Sasuke they were just shells. He idly wondered if he had to go back to his mind to wake up, or if he would wake up in his uncle's body. Neither possibility was particularly attractive at the moment, so he kept wandering until a dark figure shoved itself out of the center of the lake and approached him at speed. Sasuke didn't even look up from the peach-patterned shell in his hands. "Did you pass out again?" "I think I'm still passed out." As soon as Orochimaru's head hit the ground and not a second later, said Indra in a mix of pride and exhaustion. Sasuke glared up at him. "If this is your mind, can you at least not bleed on your seashells?" With a thought, the man before him was dry, unharmed, and as clean as if he'd stepped out of the onsen. "If this is going to become the regular occurrence, I know it will. I'm teaching you how to dry yourself out." "How do you know this will happen again?" "Your future vision. They shot that eye out, remember?" "No, I know that because based on the signals I've been ignoring for anywhere between 1 to 2 hours of combat, I'm going to be drugged into oblivion first for the pain, and then for surgery, then for the other pain." Sasuke made a face. "Did you lose your other arm or something?" "Nope, but I'm going to need new ribs, again. And my ex-wife isn't here to regrow them, so that's one more reason for the drugs. It's almost enough to make me wish for Hashirama cells, creepy tumorous little things. Like the first Hokage cells. If a bunch of morally dubious scientists cultivated them in petri dishes, then yes. I have no idea how my ex-wife put up with them." "So your wife, the aunt I never met, was a medical ninja?" Indra nodded and sat down on the shore. "Well, if we're going to be stuck here for a while, I can tell you the story of how she healed 2 idiots from the brink of death and punched a goddess." "I thought you said you wouldn't lie." "Absolute truth, I swear on our father's soul. Now." His uncle cleared his throat and gestured at the sky as clouds began to form shapes. "Long ago, in a distant land, Itobi, the shape-shifting master of darkness, unleashed an unspeakable evil. But 3 foolish ninja warriors wielding magical swords stepped forth to oppose me." Chapter 32, Operation Harmony PT4 Regrets in the Aftermath. Indra had spent quite some time telling his children stories in his first life, whether it was one of Boruto's requests for another cool story Mr. Sasuke, or a much younger Sarada. One more story before bedtime, Papa. As a result, he adapted fairly easily, giving his younger self stories of a powerful medical ninja who could heal any injury and whose fists could split the land asunder. Sasuke absorbed everyone with a look of unabashed wonder. Indra wondered if Sasuke was truly allowing himself to be unguarded in this mental space, or the nature of mental projections simply made honesty easier. Either way, it was a chance to draw his younger self out of his shell, so he took it. After a story where his wife had developed a cure for a chakra parasite that lived in a town's well, Indra felt a tug in his stomach pulling him in the direction of consciousness and left with an apology. Sasuke nodded seriously and began the swim back to his own mind. He'd spent time with his uncle before, obviously, but it had just been them, without Naruto or Sakura there to interrupt. He had expected it to feel nice, but to Sasuke's surprise, he almost felt lonely. "Welcome back to the land of the living," quipped Anko as Indra let out a mulled groan and opened his eye. "Don't bother trying to speak, I've wrapped your head in bandages and some spare wire to make sure your jaw doesn't fall off and opened you up to check on some nasty swelling. It's not as bad as it could be, 3 fractures and 2 clean breaks, so you'll be on desk duty for a while, along with half the company. Thank the gods we went with an all-Umbu force or we would have lost more to those celestial maggots, if that's what we're calling them." She shivered and Indra gave a small experimental nod to convey his agreement. Danzo's inadvertent name had clearly spread while he'd been out, which from the lighting, only looked to be a few hours. Night had fallen and the clearing around the wreckage of the Sound Village was dotted with medical stations, campfires, and the masked forms of Umbu either diving into the tunnels with flashlights or standing watch. Indra met Anko's eyes and held up a hand in a writing motion and a raised eyebrow. Communication was going to be important, especially because even if Danzo had saved his life, he wasn't going to trust the man with all the secrets the Sound Village contained. Especially if one of those secrets was Yugo. The boy deserved better. Fortunately, Anko understood him. Yeah, keep your headband on, I've gotcha. She scrounged around and produced a few sheets of paper, a pencil, and a clipboard to bind them all together. I'm not going to hold it against you, so no need to look so serious all the time. Indra wrote down a small question mark. Killing Orochimaru before I could. It was on my bucket list, but hey, now I've had time to see what kind of a train he ran on you, I'm glad I stayed out of the line of fire. You know you had 226 different kinds of poison in your veins. Indra shrugged and felt for his neck, which was indeed wrapped in more bandages. Actually, most of him was bandaged or had wooden splints, so he wouldn't really be fighting anytime soon. Most of those poisons had been neutralized though, the remnants of Orochimaru's original experiments on Sasuke all those years ago, how he'd met Karen. Speaking of, did you find either of the Uzumaki girls? He asked. Teiwa and Karen. The second one could have been at the northern hideout, but at this time I wasn't sure. Short, red hair, glasses, rose-tinted eyes? Anko shook her head, a bitter look on her normally grinning face. Sorry Indra-san, no dice. The Sound Four managed to break through and tie us down with spider thread before they got away, and they ditched the summon once the big guy woke up. They all went on foot from there and we lost track of them once they crossed into grass. Easily could have followed them, but given the fact we had a small war near their border, Lord Danzo didn't want us pushing our luck. That left a bitter taste in his mouth, but Indra accepted it had been inevitable. Some of the Sound Ninja would escape, but they'd hoped to tie down as many as possible for usage as bounties or bargaining chips. But especially. Yeah, we confirmed it after we made sure you wouldn't die. No mud clone, no body substitution shedding, no reanimation crap. Orochimaru's dead and we've got his head sealed into a scroll, ready for the Hokage and the council to receive it. At least now, I can rest a bit easier. Considering you killed the 8-headed Orokai, I would say so. Anko scowled at him and stood up. Look, that was a group effort, don't try and pin that accomplishment on me just because I killed the last head from the inside. I don't need your pity, or your false praise. She shoved a few items into a medical bag and moved off across the makeshift camp, doubtless in search of less idiotic patients to treat. Indra sighed through his nose, folded his hands and looked up into the sky. Considering how he wasn't supposed to talk for a few weeks and from the wooziness, had been given enough painkillers to stagger an ox, some more company would be appreciated. An Umbu agent, one he didn't recognize, leaned over, saw Indra was indeed awake, and left at a brisk pace. Damn it. Well, he'd killed Orochimaru. Step 1 on his very long checklist was done, and best of all, the snake didn't have to stay dead. With the evil release jutsu, Indra could unseal the fragment of Orochimaru's soul the Sunin had implanted into Anko's curse mark, just as Indra done the first time in an act of blind guesswork that had helped the Shinobi Alliance win the Fourth War. An Orochimaru who hadn't distorted himself with medical experiments, endless body theft, and who would see a leaf village that celebrated his death, might be more willing to listen to Indra. He'd never been entirely certain why the snake had sided with him back in his first life, and despite dozens of meetings with the man since then, on matters both personal and political, he'd never gotten a straight answer. Now, in this second life, he'd killed Orochimaru once again and would keep the snake's possible revival as an ace in the hole. Ah, you're finally awake? Good, we have much to discuss. Indra silently cursed as Shimura Danzo wound his way around piles of medical supplies and approached him. The same Umbu from before carried a chair, which he placed at Indra's bedside, and Danzo settled in with a groan. I think, from now on, I will leave these missions to younger men. Fly, you are dismissed. The Umbu disappeared with a whoosh of displaced air as Indra readied his clipboard. If they were going to talk, he had questions of his own to ask, namely what possessed you to invite yourself onto this mission and onto my own squad, no less? Danzo leaned forward onto what had been his tree branch and was now a smoothly carved cane. Because considering what you've told me, even if your loyalty to the Leaf Village was beyond question, which it wasn't up until now, I needed to make sure things went according to plan. You could have joined Orochimaru and killed my Umbu in the bargain as an offering to him. Agents have tried that before and I've lost Umbu to the snake just the same way. The pages and pages of intelligence on members of a hostile intelligence organization wasn't enough. Trust, but verify. You should know this, Indra-san. First rule of covert intelligence operations. I thought it was, don't do stupid shit, sir. Indra added the honorific as an obvious afterthought, and the other invalid sighed and looked to the head of Indra's bed, where a small lamp enclosed a flickering candle, giving the scene a small point of light. Originally I was going to congratulate you for your efforts today, Indra Uchiha. The efforts you took to keep our squad safe amongst those celestial maggots were not unnoticed. That you, Kat, Anko, and myself all contributed to the death of Orochimaru can also be counted in our favor. The Uchiha did not react, only scribbling another question mark and leaning it in Danzo's direction. The old man let out a deep sigh and leaned closer to the lamp, staring directly into the flickering candle within, watching it jump and beads of tallow roll down the sides of the fat yellow wax. Both were silent for some time before Danzo spoke again. I have no surviving children of my own, you know. My wife died in childbirth, and our son, in the Third War. The Shimura line will end with me, just as yours nearly ended with young Sasuke. Indra wasn't sure where this was going, but a deep throbbing from his left cheek told him any attempts to speak out loud would be excruciating, so he kept his mouth shut. You've mentioned before you had a daughter and that, similarly, she is no longer with you. In that, we share a commonality I had not expected. So, despite how much we have clashed before now and how much we will doubtless clash in the months and years ahead, I cannot bring myself to hate you. Not the way I hated Orochimaru, or the rest of the Uchiha clan. Followed by a drawing of the red and white Uchiha fan. You had so little contact with them, you doubtless only saw the aftermath of the massacre and not its creeping inevitability. Many of the Uchiha were plotting a coup and would have brought the village down to satisfy their ambition, or their feelings of wounded pride. They would have thrown away the loyalty of their comrades, the trust of the village, all that they had because a few hotheads were not content. Indra's eye narrowed and he scribbled furiously on the clipboard. The trust of a village that confined them to a compound, that isolated them from the political power structure, and ordered Itachi Uchiha to kill his own mother and father? Spare me the performance. I was not in time to save them, but I've done my homework, Counselor Danzo. I know enough that I could blow your involvement sky high the instant I return to the village. I had plenty of opportunities in the last 6 months. Now I want you to tell me why. He underlined the last word twice with some vehemence and his eye flickered red as Danzo's face morphed from exhaustion to grim acceptance. I had wondered what you knew versus what you only suspected. But I am too old and too tired to kill you, and you are too wounded to kill me, so I shall answer your question, from what Itachi was able to tell us. You must understand, things went wrong at every step. You stole Shisui Uchiha's eye, when he tried to stop the coup. You denied the Uchiha a chance to clean their own house. Danzo took a deep breath and let it out slowly, tamping down his frustration. That eye, above all else, was a danger. One day I will tell you and perhaps young Sasuke the story of why the Kota Amatsukami had to be taken, but it is not tonight. I'm not going anywhere. The first time your daughter failed, how did you react? When she tried to walk and stumbled, when she grazed her knee on a training ground, when she was wounded. When she was careless or overconfident or didn't believe in herself. How did you feel, and then what did you do? Indra stared at Danzo, who was ignoring him completely in favor of the candle. The grim acceptance had collapsed back into exhaustion and suddenly Danzo's age was cast in stark relief by the weak light. Shadows filled the deep lines in his face, born of stress and worry instead of smiles or laugh lines. The X-shaped scar on his chin was old and textured like the bark of an oak, while his single visible eye had deep bags underneath it. His hands shook slightly as they grasped the head of his cane. Not much, but the mere fact of it was enough. The formidable ninja no longer completely controlled his own body. He looked the same way Indra and his husband had during the Otsutsuki War. Old men, past their prime but still determined as ever, still filled with the deep love and devotion that had pushed them through those dark days. But still, they had been so tired, at the end. More than once, Indra had fallen asleep with his hand curled around Naruto's, wishing with all his being he could rest. Then, his daughter had thrown him back through time and his years unwound like a spring. He looked young, he fought like he had been when he was young, but in his soul, he still felt old. Danzo looked how Indra felt as he repeated himself. When your child failed, how did you feel? His pencil hovered over the page for a while until his thoughts ordered themselves. Her safety always came first, of course. But after that? Regret, that I did not prevent the mistake, or prepare her better for the trials she would face. Sometimes, disappointment, when it was something I knew she could have avoided. But now, I can never criticize her again. None of the Uchiha. Exactly. As parents we try to prepare our children the best we can for the world's cruelties, its unfairness, but we can only do so much. Even when we or they make mistakes, no matter how much we wished it, those consequences had to play out. Both the Uchiha and Orochimaru allowed themselves to fail, or rather, they refused to consider the idea they could fail at all and so failed in the most total of ways. The old man let out a bitter laugh. For all their interest in eyes, they refused to see. So you killed them because they failed? No, they died because they failed the leaf and now threatened it. Hiruzen and I, we tried our best, but we failed them as parents, of a sort, and so their failures do reflect deeply upon us. Orochimaru drew my eye during the Third Shinobi War, though he'd served in the Second. He never had much in the way of natural empathy, only knew of its absence from his master and his fellow Sannin. He saw they could offer others things he could not, and knew his talents did not lie in that field. He was still an exceptional ninja, gifted in many jutsu, and without scruples for the difficult jobs a war required. I brought him into my service, and it is no exaggeration to say our actions prevented the destruction of the Leaf Village twice over during those years. We were hard-pressed, so I ordered Orochimaru to continue research he had long abandoned. Any insight we could gain from enemy corpses, any scrap of advantage, I would take and consider it worth the price. Danzo lifted a hand and ran his hand through his remaining hair. He never complained about any of it, even enjoyed the work, from what we could tell. But he knew enough to worry that his lack of worry was worth mentioning. I had thought it to be a developed trait, a defense mechanism after the loss of his clan, just as Sasuke is now quiet and sullen. Don't you dare compare Sasuke to that monster. He's nothing like him. Not now, true. But monsters only become monsters when they are not watched, when they are left to be preyed upon by the world and they become jagged, sharp things. They find their validation in dark places and take it when they can. I had spoken with him many times about his worries, I had soothed his fears, told him his actions were justified. I thought that with my eye on him, away from the battlefield, he could learn to control his sociopathy. This man, I said to myself, this man could one day succeed me as the head of the Umbu Black Ops, and he had just the mind for it. A keen sense of politics, strategy, timing, and no inhibitive moral scruples like Kushina Uzumaki or Mikoto Uchiha. His voice grew heavy as Indra listened. But I had underestimated his hunger for knowledge, and how instead of restraining his sociopathy, it found new heights. Ignorant, I proposed experimentation with Hashirama Senju's cells soon after Tsunade Senju fled the village, and we began in high spirits. But the worries Orochimaru had spoken of again and again were gone. Sacrifices must be made for the sake of the village, but 59 children. Indra chanced a question. Do you feel regret for your actions, Shimura Danzo? At that, the man snorted and looked him full in the face, his face returning to its habitual small frown. Regret, HMF. The head of the Umbu must be made of sterner stuff. Hesitation breeds weakness, as with Hiruzen, and so hesitation is defeat. Once there is doubt, the battle is lost before it is even joined. I cannot allow myself to feel regret, Indra Uchiha. If I regretted those deaths, I would then be forced to consider all the others. I would become cautious and weak. The Leaf Village would come to harm. No, there can be no regret. Instead, I am disappointed. Disappointed the man I had hoped would succeed me instead chose to flee the village and become a makeshift ruler of a fantasy built on experimentation. I am disappointed the Uchiha chose a fight they could not win and lost before the battle had even begun. Indra began scribbling madly, but Danzo wasn't finished. I respected your father very much, you know. Evil Eye Fugaku Uchiha, one of the best clan heads in my lifetime. A strong man, a good man, but when it counted, he failed. He was the leader of the Uchiha clan, and if he had refused the young fools who called for revolution, for blood in the streets, they would have had no support. He could have turned them over to us, as a captain of the police force, and justice would have been served. Instead, he allowed himself to be consumed by his wife's hatred, then his clan's hatred, and sealed his fate. However, he retains my respect. Indra raised his eyebrow once more in a silent question. He refused to kill Naruto Uzumaki to accomplish his goal. If the Uchiha truly were behind the attack of the Nine Tails as your story confirmed, he refused to repeat that madness. He had the Mangekyo Sharingan and refused to use it to unseal the Nine Tails once more. He knew if his ability became known within the Uchiha clan, they would force his hand, bring him the boy and either hand him the knife or just do it themselves. He knew by that point his wife would have burnt the village to the ground, but he refused to allow that to come to pass. What I'm hearing is you and Orochimaru killed 59 children and Fugaku Uchiha the traitor refused to kill one. Then you sent Itachi, and he refused to kill again. Even as traitors, my family is more honorable than you are. But as long as we're talking about children, I have a few more suspicions I'd like you to confirm. Danzo sat back, his expression wary. His confession, if that's what this was, hadn't garnered Indra much pity for the man. Tortured self-rationalizations and a refusal to admit mistakes meant nothing against the graves of his clan. But Danzo had sought out this conversation, and even if he wouldn't admit it out loud, did appear to be looking for some kind of absolution. Normally, Indra would have spat in his face, but this was an opportunity for Fu Yamanaka and dozens of other, younger, root agents in training. He began to write. We've spoken many times, on many topics, Shimura Danzo. But the only time I've truly shocked you was when I threatened to reveal Root's recruiting methods to Genin. The presence of Fu Yamanaka on this mission just confirmed my suspicions. How long have you been stealing Konoha's children and disguising them as stillbirths? Or do you wait long enough for the parents to become attached to rip them away? The leader of Root's hands tightened on his new cane, but otherwise he did not move, composing his response very carefully. Indra, again, we both know that is a hollow threat. You won't tell the council, or even one of the clan heads. To do so would risk the dissolution of the Leaf Village, invite a return to the era of warring states, or simply see clan after clan slaughtered or absorbed by rival villages. You would have far more blood on your hands than even I. Indra noted with a narrowed eye that the man had carefully avoided giving any answer one way or the other, but the threat was enough to keep his attention. He returned to the clipboard. By taking the children in the first place, because of your greed, or desperation, or whatever lie you want to give me, you invited this calamity, Danzo, not I. But before I offer you a solution to the near-certain death sentence you have given yourself, I'd like to ask you if you remember why Madara and Hashirama founded the Leaf Village in the first place? The old man let out a grunt of derision. I was a boy when the Senju first grew that vast forest, when the Uzumaki and the Umino collaborated on the barriers, and everyone with working hands built the walls of the Leaf Village. Don't pretend you have any special knowledge, illegitimate child of the Uchiha. They founded the village to cement the peace between their two warring clans, and weaker clans flocked to the area seeking both Uchiha and Senju protection. When Hashirama died, his younger brother, Tobirama, was elected as second Hokage and built most of the systems the Leaf Village uses today, from more detailed governance to inter-village chunin exams. Indra made a disbelieving noise in his throat and wrote his response. As precise a definition as can be found in a Konoha textbook, but I suspect you don't want to remember the real reason because it exposes so many of the second and third's failures, as well as your own. And what real reason did Hashirama and Madara have to found Konohagakure? So their children would not have to die on the battlefield, killing other men's sons. From my studies and memory, the Second Great Shinobi War was the only one to not have genin teams on the front lines at some point, correct? The cane stabbed down several times into the grass as Danzo tried to rise, but his muscles betrayed him. If anything, his glare at Indra intensified. Those were desperate times even for the Uchiha, you presumptuous brat. We escaped annihilation at the hands of the other villages more times than I cared to count. The second Hokage was forced to use forbidden jutsu just to create a stalemate, and the third war lasted for 7 years. Can you understand the toll such fighting takes on an armed force? Their social cohesion, their logistics, their infrastructure? Sarutobi and I never enjoyed sending children to war, but we can't all have eyes that grow stronger when people die around us, can we, Uchiha? You speak as if you have any moral superiority, when your hands are just as dirty as mine. The genin system is too entrenched now, thanks to your failures, Danzo. Even if I were elected Hokage tomorrow, I could not reform it without outcry from the clans. But the children under your thumb en route? When did babies start disappearing from cribs? 10 years ago? 20? 25? I remember finding Uchiha dead in those unmarked graves from the Third War, and there will not be another as long as I breathe. But I have a solution that could spare you the shame of a public execution, as I said. Danzo was looking at Indra as if he wanted to impale the man on the bed with his cane, but finally acquiesced. What plan do you have in mind? There are children and teenagers within route who you have not yet damaged beyond repair, or trained to become perfect shinobi. There are children we have captured here in the Sound Village as well, who were also being trained in this hellhole. Use one moral failing to cover another. When we return to the village, allow your recruits to mix with the refugees until they are indistinguishable. Then, people like Fu Yamanaka can return to their homes, and you can say to the clan heads each one has finished the necessary training to control whichever unusual power you snapped them up for. A family happy to be made whole will not ask further questions. You ask me to sacrifice the future of Konoha's covert operations program, to ease your bleeding heart? You are an even bigger fool than I had imagined. There is a reason I do not ask many adult Umbu to become root agents. Even Kakashi's application was terminated, for all his promise. He was too emotional, while root missions require dedication and silence that can only come from decades of training. Conditioning, you mean, wrote Indra in a scrawl that screamed outrage. You justify traumatizing and sealing away children because you would need to completely break a leaf shinobi to make them do what you ask. How much easier for you to use malleable children. To think it was Orochimaru who supposedly enjoyed young children. I suppose he learned it from you. The cane cracked across his face and sent searing pain across Indra's already broken jaw as the wiring there snapped. The released tension sent the wire flying upwards and tore through the bandages still hiding half of Indra's face. The one-eyed man ripped them off angrily and forced his mouth to form words. I am offering you a chance to redeem yourself, Danzo. You can keep your damned psychopaths, emotionless eunuchs, or whatever else you've done to the men and women you've made into shells, but you will let the children go. What you have built cannot be saved, so either allow root to be salvaged for what good shinobi can be recovered from it, or bring down the village you swore to protect, just to hold on to power. Just like the Uchiha. What you propose is the destruction of root, Danzo growled as he finally stood up, now leaning almost entirely on his cane. The Uchiha shook his head. The remaining root agents will be the last of their kind, under your command still. They will live out the remainder of their days, giving their lives for the leaf in silence, just as your code dictates. I have seen it, Indra tapped his strangely textured cheek under an empty eye socket. Most of them could not be recovered, and several who attempted it were driven wholly insane. Others became missing, striking out aimlessly, or joining groups that promised harm to anyone wearing a headband. At the time, those had been allied shinobi headbands, but Indra was omitting that particular detail of the future. This way, those ninja remain under your control, under leaf control, while their successors get to try and lead decent lives as shinobi. Or bakers, or painters, or whatever they want. They deserve to find a future that you and the second Hokage stole from them, when you both decided sending children to war was a good idea. This way, you get to keep your little kingdom underneath the streets of Konoha and get to be remembered as the man who brought missing children home to their families. Everybody wins. Danzo cocked his head. But what do you get out of this, Indra Uchiha? You're so willing to free all these children, who have already sworn to fight and die for the leaf. Even with those children waiting for you to come home? Why, I thought you had already replaced your daughter. Indra slapped a hand over his remaining eye before the Amaterasu could bloom from it, and he hissed as the black flame seared into his palm before he reflexively extinguished it. When he lowered his hand to reveal bright pink flesh, and a glowing red Mangekyo Sharinan, the leader of Root had unveiled Shisui's red eye as well. You are a cruel man, Shimura Danzo, Indra spat. Only to keep you honest, Uchiha. The worst part was, Indra couldn't say the man was wrong. He'd failed as Sarada's father and now, here he was, trying to raise Naruto and his own younger self, in some twisted kind of recompense. He could never replace Sarada, his love for her and the pain that spilled from it ran too deep to be removed. But he could be better. Because those children, both the ones in the Uchiha estate right now and hidden away in Root, they all deserved the kind of life he didn't get to have after the age of 7. He couldn't be that honest with a man he hated so much, so he settled for saying the next best thing. Besides, Danzo had decided to go for gut punches first. I'm proposing this because I know the most important truth of all, Danzo. He took the bait. What truth is that? Indra smiled through freshly bleeding lips and the pain of his broken jaw. Not all the Uchiha children died last year. You hid some of them in Root, didn't you? Perhaps even before that. His Sharingan preserved the look of horror that slowly dawned across Danzo's face, and Indra knew he would treasure the memory. If you slip them into the general population of orphans Konoha will soon receive, well, we all knew Orochimaru had an interest in the Sharingan, and he had an interest in vulnerable host bodies. You even get to blame your old student again, one more little bit of nostalgia, Danzo looked like he didn't know whether to be outraged or impressed. How long have you been planning this? Since the moment we decided to go after Orochimaru, really. My plan was to find the closest Root agent after the battle and write you a very long message, but since you invited yourself along things became much simpler. So you are willing to take responsibility for all these children, some of whom are already capable, battle-hardened shinobi? And aside from avoiding your threats of exposure, I will still lose Root's future and gain only a few meaningless niceties from the clan leaders. What do I gain, then, Indra Uchiha? Indra pretended to study his fingernails as he thought. They both knew he could easily force Danzo's hand on the children, could bring it up in his private briefing with the Hokage. But Sarutobi had covered for Danzo's crimes before, so he risked sweeping things under the rug. If the fact-finding missions across 3 villages had one thing in common during his first life, it was that politicians always preferred to kick problems down the road, and if not, then to bury the evidence and continue with institutional inertia. Indra wasn't going to let Sai and Fu Yamanaka spend a single moment more under Root's thumb if possible. That meant he needed backup Inoichi Yamanaka would be very willing to provide. The man was both a torture and interrogation jonin and a clan head, so no one could claim he had a soft heart. Additionally, the man had already proven himself to be trustworthy with some of Indra's secrets, so he probably wouldn't leak this to the rest of the village. Probably. Indra was well aware of the lengths an angry father would go to protect his children. But Inoichi wasn't here right now and Root's leader was. Speaking of anger, Danzo's own appeared to be under control for the moment. But if it wasn't, Indra didn't want to think about what a vengeance-focused Root could accomplish. No, if this was to succeed, Danzo would have to agree to the idea. Give the man buy-in on the decision. Indra had attended enough inter-village meetings to know mutual risk was the foundation of political compromise. Again, Naruto should have been the one to come back instead of me. He would have already fixed so much of this without drawing a single kunao. Of course, that also created the possibility of 2 nine-tailed foxes running around, which probably would have given the 5 in most of the Biju a heart attack. Indra forced himself back to the present. He had to focus on playing the hand he'd been dealt. I guess I'll just have to owe you a favor. Orochimaru had lasted so long after the 4th Great Ninja War because the man had collected favors from a great many power brokers, intelligence agents, and black market dealers across the 5 great nations. Indra had guessed, correctly, he'd learned the value of such an open-ended promise from Danzo. This was absolutely going to come back and bite him in the ass, but Indra knew he didn't have many cards of true value to play at this moment. The alternative was a messy rescue mission in the depths of Root-controlled territory that guaranteed the deaths of both Umbu and stolen children. If Sai's early freedom meant owing Danzo a favor, then that's what it would take. He offered his hand and Shimura Danzo looked at for a long moment in the flickering lamplight, weighing the offer. A favor, then. Whatever you need me to do, promised Indra. As they shook hands and Danzo struggled to his feet, Indra prayed to Amaterasu and every god or kami he could think of that he hadn't just made a horrible mistake. Chapter 33, A small war with large consequences. So Anko's now spending a week with a bunch of genin remodeling her aunt's house on punishment detail. Kat's getting promoted to captain, so I predict the barracks will tire of that rhyme before the spring hits. Oh, and her boyfriend finally worked up the courage to propose, even though he's got that lung thing. Indra gave Kakashi a thumbs up over his shoulder. The third Hokage is preparing to promote Sasuke to Chunin and ordered the science division to build an artificial Naruto. Indra raised his eyebrow. Just making sure you were listening. Indra gave the silver-haired Jonin a flat look. Ma, it's not like you have anything else to do after surgery. Indra made a circular motion with his hand that meant keep going. Okay, finding my place again on the gossip/briefing/report card, Sakura found a genjutsu in the Uchiha Jutsu vault based on Buddhist reincarnation principles and wants to test it on Sasuke. Indra shook his head wildly. There was no telling what enormous kin of celestial maggots that could unleash. Naruto. Even more denial. I told her you'd mumble that, but she told me to put it on the list. Perhaps she could test it on someone nice and safe, like Kiba and Yazuka. The boy was definitely not a reincarnation of anyone. Kakashi continued. Next, we've been trading sound prisoners with sand to build goodwill and have been turning in bounties for the missed shinobi we caught. Cloud demanded we turn over the relevant prisoners to them, but a pointed letter about the Hyuga affair shut them up rather quickly, while Stone's been totally silent. You guess who's been paranoid about that, but Intel thinks it's just because Onoki is just trying to remember if any of those poor schmucks had information or jutsu worth starting a squabble over. Likely not, so back to business as usual. Pretty standard after a big OP. Kakashi flipped to the second page and by the sunlight streaming in from the window to his right, Indra could see it was heavily redacted in black marker. Danzo's intelligence briefing then. We finally searched the bottom level of Orochimaru's experimental chambers and found where he must have been breeding, or building, or growing, the celestial maggots. Set every inch on fire, poured boiling water down into the cracks and buried the remains for good measure. They found more of those black stains in the grossest cell, and some pale flesh in around the wrist cuffs of the restraining chair. No sign of your archer though. Indra made a frustrated noise in the back of his throat and counted backwards. One more week. One more week and he would be free of this cursed mouth brace. An improvement on whatever seal they had on Shukaku, so the Sand Village has seen less storms than it used to and Raza apparently can sleep through the night, which has done wonders for his temper, I hear. Finally, the Chunin exams are being held in Cloud, which means a Leaf Genin has an equal chance of freezing to a mountain, falling off a mountain, or getting thrown off a mountain. As a result, Fu's little shadows keep camping out on top of the Hokage mountain and somebody has to pick them up when they get stuck in Lord Fourth's hair. Not strictly a matter of Leaf security, but both Fu and Danzo have been complaining about it. He had no response to any of that, so he just shrugged and continued to examine what was left of his face. Danzo's cane and the recoil of broken wire added another whip-thin scar up Indra's jawline, but it was hardly noticeable compared to the rest of him. With the self-sterilizing bandages he'd been able to avoid looking at the wound the Otsutsuki's arrow had caused and it was not a pretty sight. Dr. Ontoba had done what he could, cleaned out the dead flesh and smoothed the edges, but the black arrow had left a ragged hole in Indra's head where his Rinnegan eye had been. The hole itself was fortunately covered in shadow, even under the fluorescent light, and Indra wasn't ghoulish enough to look further. Besides, further light in that area could damage the remnants of his optic nerve even more, so he tilted his head back down and traced the scar tissue around the wound. A spiderweb of cracks spread from his cheekbone, each wavering path of scar tissue a sign of the heavy impact he'd endured. His initial assessment had been correct, he was definitely not going to be Konoha's most attractive intel officer anymore. Indra scribbled something on the clipboard he'd kept at his side for 2 weeks and held it up for Kakashi to see. As a fellow dashing ocular injury survivor, what do you think? His old sensei leaned forward, his carefree manner partially sliding away as he took a closer look as well. I think an eye patch should be sufficient, let the scarring show but keep the wound itself hidden. Women like the scars, it gives you a rugged look. It also makes me easily identifiable for enemy ninja. Think I should just wear my headband like yours? Kakashi slapped his shoulder with the intelligence documents in a forced attempt at levity. Don't go stealing my style, Indra, I need to stay distinctive. Make your own wardrobe decisions. He glanced pointedly at the purple scarf Indra was still wearing, and the other man shrugged as if to say, what can you do? You want me to finish this intelligence report, or take you shopping? Keep in mind there's 3 very anxious children waiting outside. Summarize the rest. Mist is still busy killing each other, grass is furious we invaded the land of rice paddies, and the daimyo of said rice paddies is alternating between blustering public statements and quiet appeals to the Leaf Village concerning those celestial maggots. I suspect grass will be getting quite a few slash and burn missions to root them out. Indra pulled some of his hair down to cover his eye. It would do until they went shopping this afternoon. Was that a subtle joke at Counselor Danzo, or was I reading into it? Reading into it? Remember, you're a regular Jonin, back in the Leaf Village after pulling of a tremendously successful operation. No more Black Ops for you in a while, and no more politics either. Indra smothered a reluctant chuckle and Kakashi had to admit defeat. Okay, less politics. Next week, I'm taking you out drinking. It's about time I complained at you for shoving 3 terrors into my face for weeks. They moved out of the bathroom as Indra's response fluttered back into the copy ninja's hands on a scrap of paper. You know you love them. Indra and Kakashi were greeted by 3 equally impatient faces, and none of them were subtle about it. Naruto was of course the loudest. Indra-san, we've been waiting forever. Is it really that hard to make sure you lost your eye? Sakura and Sasuke shoved at him from either side, causing the blonde to wobble in place like a bowling pin. Seriously Naruto, you have all the tact of a brick. When you become Hokage, I'm going to have to spend most of my day rescuing you from international incidents, won't I? Sasuke, I'm pretty sure you both will get into plenty of trouble on your own, right Indra-sensei? Their temporarily mute guardian/sensei raised his hand for calm, and the children were at least willing to entertain the idea, though the boys carried on some low-volume bickering in the background. At this point, it was almost habitual banter, which boded well for Indra's hopes. He scribbled a response. If I have my way, all 3 of you will be absolute terrors as ninja, so there will be equal blame to go around. Sakura, I'd say you have an even worse temper than Naruto, you just bury it. Which is part of why the 3 of us will be attempting something unorthodox on this picnic today. All 3 of them looked curious now, while Sakura looked slightly guilty as Indra continued. In order to have an actual conversation, I'll bring all 4 of us into Naruto's mind, if he is willing. Naruto tucked a hand behind his hair and grinned in relish. Are you kidding? I've been waiting for today forever. He fished in his back pocket and produced a sheet of paper folded 7 times to fit. I even wrote up a whole list of stuff I'm gonna say to that bastard fox. Sasuke looked taken aback and Indra fondly indulgent, but Sakura just sighed. Naruto, you know physical objects don't travel with you into a genjutsu. It's all just an illusion. Indra gave a wobbly hand gesture that indicated the rules were a little less black and white. He'd seen the Sage of 6 Paths show up in his mind and fought there several times, so there absolutely was a physical component. But Sakura was on a rant now, going over the properties of a ninja's mind, physical, brain-based, and a ninja's soul, spiritual, infuriatingly enigmatic. After the terrifying afternoon where Sasuke had nearly drowned in nightmares, Naruto had lasted an impressive 2 days before he and Sasuke spilled the beans on the 9 tails to Sakura, who they'd found in the Konoha library surrounded by scrolls on spiritual disease and possession jutsu. She'd been the one to give Naruto the idea of actually visiting the Kyuubi, and in turn he'd insisted on bringing his friends for backup. So, they'd had to wait impatiently for Indra to return to the Leaf Village and then for him to regrow his ribs, a process Dr. Ontoba had overseen with a resigned acceptance. Now, they were combining the children's yell at the 9 tails plan with Kakashi's go on a picnic plan by gathering around the coziness of a kotetsu and feasting until they couldn't move. Well, everyone else would feast. Indra was surviving on Sasuke's vegetable protein shakes and spite. One more week, he reminded himself. The 4 of them left the hospital in the direction of the market district, with Kakashi trailing behind, looking like he wasn't sure if he should join the conversations or simply leave. He compensated by pulling out Ika Ika Holiday and drifting over Indra's shoulder. The older Uchiha was also silent for most of the trip as he contemplated the idea that had struck him that morning. Danzo had spent the last 2 weeks loosening the parameters of the silence seals on the children en route and covertly slipping them into the Konoha orphanage, which was now close to full. Fortunately, in the staff's point of view, many of the new arrivals were quiet, dutiful, and almost never fought amongst themselves. Still, there had been some friction between the more aggressive orphans and the root inductees, who tended to respond to violence with extreme prejudice. No one had been killed, but there were plenty of kids with headaches and bruised tailbones. Indra's idea was to move the children, including some of the sound refugees such as Yamanaka-Fu's newly adopted kin and Dosa, into the Uchiha district. They needed a place root agents couldn't enter, live around other children, and Sasuke needed to see something in the district besides ghosts. The only question was if he would agree to it. Indra put the odds at about 50/50ths. Hey Indra-san. He looked up to see Naruto grabbing a large stalk of broccoli. Can we have crab nabe, please, please? Indra looked to the others and Sakura nodded while Sasuke gave a more subdued shrug. Go for it, search out ingredients and wait in line. I'll come find you three. The children disappeared as Sasuke thought back to parenting book number 2. Minor freedoms and expressions of independence should be encouraged, as they reinforce trust between parent and child. Hey, Indra, incoming 5 o'clock, warned Kakashi. The Uchiha stepped to the side, expecting another shopper but got an arm around his shoulders instead. Well, if it isn't the famously unexpected Indra Uchiha. Good to meet you in person, said a jovial voice. Indra turned and looked right into the eyes of Jiraiya the Toad Sage. His Naruto had said a great deal about Jiraiya the Pervy Sage and most of it was glowing recommendations, or, if he was deep into a bottle, fond recollections of their 2-year journey while Sasuke had been with Orochimaru. The man had been another father figure for Sasuke's husband, so for that, he'd been grateful. That Jiraiya was also Konoha's spymaster meant his noisy arrival in the market square was also not a coincidence, especially since the man had been Orochimaru's teammate at one point. So, Indra pushed down the lightning chakra he'd been about to stream across his body at the unexpected contact and simply offered his clipboard. Can't speak with a wired jaw, come back next week. You are welcome to join us for lunch if you wish. Apologies for the inconvenience. Oh, it's no problem, I just wanted to personally congratulate the man who's now gaining fame across the elemental nations. Plenty of fleeing ninja saw you kill Orochimaru, after all. They separated and Jiraiya offered his massive hand, which Indra shook. The man had a crushing grip and Indra's eye could see mixed anger and respect in the Toad Sage's face, fortunately tempered by wisdom. This man knew Orochimaru had been lost for some time, but he wasn't beyond a little petty revenge for his old teammate either. If a strong handshake was the worst of it, then good. But this was also a warning from Konoha's spymaster that he was becoming a person of interest and to watch his back in the elemental nations. Both men stepped back as Jiraiya continued to speak. I'd honestly love to join you for lunch, but I've got a meeting of my own with the Hokage, and he's not a man you keep waiting. See you later. He waved back at them as he walked away and Indra stared in bemusement after the shock of long white hair. Not at all what I was expecting from Naruto's godfather. Didn't even try to meet him and this is the first time he's been back in the village in what, 9 years? You keep doing this thing Indra-san, grumbled Kakashi, where you know way more than you should and it's creeping me out. Indra smirked and tapped his eye, which sent Kakashi off on a muttered rant about how eyes were the most common dojutsu and why couldn't more clans just have decent smell like the Haytake or quick reaction time like the Ackermans. Despite the copy ninja's stream of commentary, they made the rounds of the market, collecting both the children and the appropriate ingredients for a rich steaming broth in addition to 10 or so dark blue eye patches. Indra wasn't particularly surprised that he'd gained notoriety, but Naruto's glowing memories of the Toad Sage didn't fit a man who refused to meet his own godson. Perhaps it was the family-starved Uchiha in him talking, but Indra was at something of a loss and Kakashi didn't need any reminders of the absence of adults in Naruto's childhood until now. At least this year when the boy had turned 10, they'd been able to hold a small party which had made Naruto's eyes light up like sapphires and gotten the emotionally constipated Sasuke a little choked up. What they were doing today had the same likelihood of causing tears, but they weren't going to be the good kind. Indra hoped this wasn't going to be another one of his mistakes, because he was making too many of those to be entirely comfortable with this. Still, All three of the children had insisted on it, and he had Kakashi as backup in case something went wrong. As the five of them settled into the decidedly cozy kotetsu and the even more warming soup, decided to make absolutely sure. When all of them were finished and feeling decidedly sleepy, cozying up with pillows or propped against the couch, Indra fixed Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura with a stern look. One last time, I want to make sure you all know what you're getting into here. You want me to bring the three of you, children, into Naruto's mind so you can meet the nine-tailed fox who most assuredly wants to break free and eat us all? You don't see how that's not concerning to me? Naruto shook his head while Sakura crossed her arms in defiance. Sasuke spoke first. Look uncle, we all know about it and now for some reason it's taken up residence in two of our heads. Facing it together is the best strategy, so it can't drive us apart with lies. We'll all hear the same thing and once we know it's real, it won't seem so scary. Better to face the real thing than worry about some invisible beast, right? Like you said before, if something goes wrong, Kakashi can help. I'll do my best, promised the copy ninja. Yeah. Naruto chimed in. We all go in my head together and kick his butt. Indra cleared his throat and glared at Naruto, who verbally backtracked immediately. Not that we're gonna try anything dumb like punching him, you know. Indra had been very clear on that rule. As long as they were outside the bars of Naruto's cage, their souls were safe. Once inside, they were fair game for the fox. Sakura's hands were gripping the table as she kept silent, but once Indra gestured to her, the pink-haired girl slammed them down, making the other two jump in surprise. No way, I'm not backing out of this. You guys all kept this a secret from me and I'm tired of it. She looked frantic with anger as Naruto reached out to put a hand on her wrist. I know I'm not from some special clan with old-ass bloodlines or anything, but I'm your friend. I want to be a great ninja just as much as you do and I'm gonna prove it. You watch, this'll be my first big step. Neither of the boys said anything stupid like, it's too dangerous, or, we'll protect you, which was good because if they had, Indra would have refused to take them down there at all. It would have showed they had been ignoring his warnings and his caution. Instead, Sasuke gave Sakura a small smile while Naruto squeezed her wrist. Like you said, we're gonna do this together. All three of them had determined smiles now and Indra felt pride swell in his chest. Despite his mistakes so far, the kids were going to be alright. Alright then, if everyone's ready? They were. Look into my eye and follow my lead. His face was calm as the red and black of the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan folded out of his pupil, wrapped each of the children's minds in its embrace, and pulled them down, down, down. In an instant all three of them were unconscious, leaving Kakashi alone. He looked at each of their faces for a moment as he flipped up his headband, then shrugged and returned to Ika Ika. No matter how relaxed he seemed, however, his eyes kept returning to his charges. Just in case. Just in case. Indra had warned her the experience would be unpleasant, but Sakura's first impression of Naruto's mind was a mouthful of sewer water. Even if it didn't exist, the taste was foul and she gagged as she spat repeatedly in an effort to get rid of the taste. Once she was done, Sakura rose, and took in her surroundings with a wary eye. They'd arrived in a poorly lit, low-ceilinged sewer with bronze pipework along the walls. The water she'd had the misfortune to stumble into was perhaps ankle-high and Sakura was annoyed none of the others had the same experience. To her right, Sasuke had his hands in his pockets and was staring around with the bored expression he normally wore when he was trying to pretend he wasn't staring just as much as they were. He snorted. Yeah Naruto, this is about what I'd expect from your head. Oh yeah, well what about yours, retorted Naruto as they began to follow Indra down the winding passageways. You've got all those nightmares he loves eating, right? Sasuke didn't have a reply, but Indra's voice floated back down the tunnel to derail the argument anyway. Sakura, using what I've told you about mental architecture and self-perception, how would you describe Naruto's mind? It's good practice for all three of you. While Naruto protested that he wasn't any good at genjutsu, so why should he have to learn this stuff, Sakura protested that she didn't want to invade Naruto's personal privacy. Even though Indra was facing away from them, Sakura could tell he was rolling his eye. He's given us permission to come inside his head, any conclusions we draw are his own fault. Now, Sakura. His tone was questioning, the gentle needling of a teacher who wanted the student to answer the question, so Sakura squared her shoulders and looked around. Well, from the narrow corridors, I'd say Naruto concentrates fiercely on what interests him, but has little interest in broader pursuits. The rust and low lighting indicate someone who she hesitated. Come on Sakura, tell me, cheered Naruto, and bizarrely she found herself warmed by the praise. Someone who has emotional or spiritual detritus which clouds their spiritual energy. Sakura started to shrink back slightly, but a hand on her back forced her forward. She looked back down the tunnel and saw the transparent form of her inner self giving a determined thumbs up before vanishing. She looked back and Naruto didn't seem offended, which was a relief. Sasuke lifted one sodden sandal out of the muck and gave the back of Naruto's head a disdainful look. What about the water? Indra-san's head has a big lake, but it's not as gross as this. Naruto let out a half-hearted noise of protest as Sakura shrugged. Indra-san said lots of people's heads use water as a visual metaphor because of its fluidity, transparency, and symbolic value. It's not unusual. Sasuke gave her a half-smile of silent thanks, but it died on his face when they felt a wave of malevolent chakra pulse through the tunnel. Whoa, Sakura breathed, half in awe and half in revulsion. If the sewer water was bad, this was worse, because it tasted foul. Like battery acid or ash, if she had to guess. Even Sasuke's yeah was shaky. Indra drew his sword and Sakura suddenly realized none of the others had any weapons with them. If this was Naruto's mind, couldn't he put them all in samurai armor or something? A second wave of chakra came down the tunnel along with a roar that sounded far too close for comfort. All right, everyone, called Indra back down the line. Stick together and remember, Kurama can rage and snarl all he wants, but he can't hurt any of you. Not while I'm here. His voice was strong and confident, but Sakura found herself slipping her fingers into Sasuke's hand nonetheless. He looked back at her, surprised, but accepted the contact as his free hand likewise moved up to grasp Naruto's. Naruto just grabbed onto Indra's belt and together they moved forward. Only 2 tunnels later, the group emerged into a vast space. Sewage pipes larger than any of them spanned the walls, feeding water down into the space, but the water below them never rose an inch. Beyond them was a massive golden gate, with thick bars and a paper seal over the lock. What lay beyond the gates turned to look at them with one fierce red eye, and Sakura peed herself a little. Even hidden in shadow and separated by a very sturdy-looking cage, the Nine Tails was still terrifying. Sasuke swallowed heavily in front of her and she felt his hand tighten on hers. Indra-sensei strode forward and planted his sword in the ground. Greetings again, Lord Kurama, mightiest of the Biju. I thought it time we finally spoke as comrades and not as adversaries. The shadows parted as an impossibly wide smile spread across the Kyuubi's face. Indra Uchiha, as bold as ever. Tell me, did you have to beg the Hokage on your knees, or was your brat's testimony on my behalf enough? And look. The fox's smile was a cavern of ivory fangs and pink flesh as it licked its lips. You've been kind enough to drag my idiot prison down here as well. I had wondered what it would take to give him even a speck of spiritual awareness. Not very much like your mother at all, are you, runt? Shut up. You don't get to talk about my mom. Considering she kept me in her soul for 27 years, I would say yes, I actually do. The vast movement and wind meant the fox was swishing its tails in satisfaction, and Sakura moved forward to put her hand on Naruto's shoulder along with Sasuke. In fact, I would say I am the one who knew her best. Every dark crevice, every weakness in her soul was open to me, and oh, there were so many by the end. Should I tell you what she looked like with the Uchiha bitch inside of her? It laughed, a thunderous sound that had all of them cover their ears, and in that reflexive moment, Naruto sprinted towards the cage, furious curses flying from his lips. Indra caught him by the scruff of the neck and, without looking, hurled him backwards. Sasuke and Sakura caught him as he landed and wrestled him to the ground as he struggled against them. Screw you, you bastard fox. Several times Sakura felt additional transparent arms emerge from her own shoulders to help restrain an orange-clad limb, but if Sasuke saw them, he said nothing. He was holding in his temper as well, his mouth a flat line as the beast dishonored both of her friend's parents. She heard Indra's voice drop from pleasant to ice-cold in a second. I didn't expect the first and greatest of the tailed beasts to take such joy in petty cruelties. Considering the lengths you went to help Sasuke, I thought perhaps we had reached an understanding, Nine-Tailed Fox. Or Kurama, which do you prefer? If you continue to act like a beast, I shall treat you like one, but I would rather not. The fox snarled and stabbed forward, but Indra had kept well back from the bars of the cage and the massive claws only protruded several feet instead of impaling the man. I will treat my cage with the respect he deserves, which is nothing. He is spiritually blind, deaf, and dumb, an unworthy heir to Kushina Uzumaki. The demmed fourth Hokage was fool enough to rip me in half and thought sealing me inside a child would be enough to keep me from my vengeance. No, Indra Uchiha, you and I will have revenge against the arrogant bastard who enslaved me that night. You told me that 6 of the 9 would fight with my uncle, broke in Sasuke as he strode up to stand just behind Indra's protective form. And you've clearly got a grudge against the Uchiha, but they're all dead, so what's the deal? Yeah, piped up Naruto from below her as 4 arms held his own behind his back. If you're bummin' around in my soul, cause the 4th was a jerk and eating Sasuke's nightmares to fix that, you owe us some answers. The fox's reply was another snarl and movement of shadows as the tailed beast paced back and forth in the limited area beyond the gate. A brat, a runt, and a flower petal, I owe you nothing. Sakura shivered as the malice layered into that statement washed over her but kept her hands tight around Naruto, who still looked like he might make another run at the cage. She dragged him up into a standing position and moved over to the Uchiha in front of the seal as Kurama continued. Of you, only the cripple is sensible enough to understand the true war that is coming so my brothers and sisters can be free once more. With that common interest, our goals align. If it was up to me, I wouldn't just stop at the guilty Uchiha. You're keeping me alive so you can heal yourself, said Sasuke in triumph as he came to the realization. But why are you only eating my nightmares and not all of the Leaf Village? Sakura answered for him. Because dream walking requires not just physical proximity but an existing connection to bridge the gap between sleeping minds. And even then, it's dangerous for mortals in case they get lost or run into a Baku demon eating other people's dreams. The nine-tailed fox snorted in what seemed to be amusement. The flower petal has done her research, it seems. Tell us then, little petal, what the difference is between a Baku and the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Drawing strength from the presence of her friends and master, Sakura locked eyes with the Nine Tails and answered. The Baki is what was just left over when the gods created the universe, but they say the sage created you deliberately. Her opponent hummed appreciatively. Yes, little petal. All of the tailed beasts have a purpose allotted to us, which humans have denied to the world for 100 years now, with little hope of escape. Your selfishness leads even now to your ruin, and our imprisonment in Jinchuriki allows us a front row seat. But you still didn't explain why you're eating my nightmares, protested Sasuke, his hands balled into fists and his voice rising in frustration. Can't you just remove them or something? If you're hungry, said Naruto, looking reluctant, I've got plenty of nightmares you can eat and you don't even have to leave my head. The others actually looked away from the murderous Biju to stare at Naruto in astonishment, even Indra. The boy turned red under the attention and kicked at the water to not meet their eyes. I know what it's like to be starving, you know. Even the Kyuubi was stunned into silence for a moment before Indra began to chuckle, holding his hand up to his face. Oh, Naruto, his voice was wistful, how I've missed that typical Uzumaki empathy. Sakura narrowed her eyes and saw tears drip down from his face to make small ripples in the water below them. Well, he had mentioned he'd married an Uzumaki, so she put the thought aside as the nine-tailed fox spoke again, but it was quieter this time. Less aggressive, somehow, even though its very existence was an act of aggression and contained violence. Curious. Just the single word, nothing more, so Naruto filled the silence. Well, it's not like I forgive you, he muttered. You killed a lot of people and my parents and the fourth Hokage, so if you try anything like that I'll never let you out. Sakura and Sasuke shot him a stop talking you idiot glare, but it was too late. The Nine Tails had picked up on the implication. So, a century of imprisonment is about to come to an end, perhaps. HMF, Mito Uzumaki had plenty of sweet promises as well, but here I am 36 years after her death and I have yet to taste the sun. If this is a false promise, I can assure you I will show no mercy, Uzumaki. I've got a name, you know. Protested the blonde. It's Naruto Uzumaki, and you gotta use it. Indra-san, what was this jerk's name again? Indra looked deeply amused, but if he had any thoughts on the exchange, he kept them to himself as the fox clashed his teeth. Indra Uchiha, how you learned it I do not know, but if you value the soul of the brat, you will not speak my name in the runt's presence. He is nothing like the old man, so he will earn it, if at all. Until then, I am simply the nine-tailed fox. Pfft, whatever. Naruto, warned Indra in what Sakura realized was her mother's apologize now voice. Ugh, fine. Thanks for not eating Sasuke's soul, I guess. Naruto gave the cage an unimpressed look and stalked off towards the entrance without looking back. He was copying Sasuke now. As Sakura and the Uchiha tried to process this new soul in Naruto, Kurama had to hide his smile. Oh, there was a buried vein of deep anger there, a flaw in the fourth's precious desperate cage. He could pry it open, he just had to use a light touch. In front of Sakura, Indra was continuing to speak, outlining plans to visit several of the villages. Something about men in cloaks. Sakura wasn't listening to the specifics because Sasuke had drifted back and was now holding her hand as he moved her away for a private conversation. Naruto's mind wasn't exactly where Sakura had expected this to happen, but she wasn't complaining. Actually, what she was trying to do was shove down all of her inner self's advice and pray Sasuke didn't notice. He did, but at least looked slightly concerned. You're really red, you okay? Sakura shook her head. I'm fine, don't worry about me. What did you need? Just thinking. Have you ever seen Naruto get angry? Are you kidding, you guys fight all the time. I'm just glad I can go home to some peace and quiet. Indra has to listen to you all weekend. No, like, actually angry. Ever. She thought. Not really. Why? So you remember when he and I did that big ceremony so we could meet with the Hokage and get some answers, one of which was that jerk. Well, I wasn't there, but yeah. I only figured it out listening to the Kyuubi talk, but, Sasuke lowered his voice enough Sakura had to lean closer to hear him. I think every time Naruto gets angry, that seal loosens just a bit. Not much, but just enough. You saw how the Nine Tails was goading us, what if there's a point to it? Back when he threw that kunai at the old man, Naruto sounded like the Kyuubi. Sakura drew back, skeptical. You're sure? Would I say it out loud if I wasn't? Sakura was forced to admit he would not. So, what, you want us to tell Indra-sensei? Sasuke looked affronted and crossed his arms. No way, we're already on thin ice with the whole dream walking thing, you want him to get locked up forever? He's our friend. No, what we do is we keep quiet about this and wait until the next time Naruto gets angry. If anything like that happens, then we can go to my uncle. You have got to be joking. They both looked up at Indra's outburst. You're saying Shukaku actually agreed with you? Last I checked he was a drunken, blood-crazed spirit sealed into a teakettle or some red-haired kid. Half the reason some of my brothers joined us was because they were unsettled by a Shukaku who could speak in complete sentences. A one-tail who was actually serious meant genuine danger. But he didn't say how he'd learned this. No premonitions or anything. We are tailed beasts, not oracles. I thought you were the one who could see the future. Past tense, said Indra grimly brushing his hair up to reveal whatever was underneath the black eye patch. The more we change to our advantage, the more out of date my intelligence becomes. However, we should hold the advantage for some time. If I have need to further consult with you, may I have your permission to return here? Provided you keep that damnable eye to yourself. Indra bowed deeply to the fox spirit. Your hospitality is greatly appreciated, Lord Kurama. Until we meet again. Until I am free. Indra strode back through the water and swept the two younger travelers in his wake as they bombarded him with questions. But of course, the Kyuubi had to have the last word. Flower petal. The Uchiha kept walking, seemingly deaf, but Sakura turned on her heel. Yes, Kyuubi-san. You have a curious mind, said the beast within Naruto's soul. Guard it well. She turned and followed the Uchiha back to Naruto's sulking silhouette in the tunnel beyond, the tailed beast's words ringing in her mind. Chapter 34, A Night on the Town. Indra glared down at the children and turned his Uchiha scowl up to full force as he folded his arm across his stump in a suitably intimidating pose. So, one last time, tell me what you've promised not to do. Naruto counted off on his fingers. We're not supposed to leave the village. We're not supposed to try new jutsu. We're not supposed to talk to the Kyuubi. We're not supposed to go bug Sakura. And why did I make these rules? Sasuke scowled at his friend, who was the source of all the possible problems his uncle saw, obviously. Because it's a school night. He turned to look back at his uncle with the same skeptical look. But then why are you going out with Kakashi? Indra gave a very good impression of a put-upon sigh, but Sasuke spotted the tug at the corner of the man's lip, which meant the one-eyed Uchiha was actually looking forward to this. Because I've only just gotten these wires off my face and he wants to celebrate. But we already celebrated, you know. Protested Naruto. How is Kakashi's idea of fun different from ours? A mop of gray hair leaned down from the doorframe. Because it involves alcohol, Naruto. You'll understand when you're older. The man grinned from underneath his mask and flipped down to a standing position from the roof without even a hitch in his breath. The boy lost interest and turned to go back inside. Pfft, whatever. All that stuff does is make people stumble around and puke all over the place. The youngest Uchiha pointed an accusatory finger at the two ninja. I'll make sure Naruto doesn't burn down the district. You make sure you keep the clan's honor intact. Indra held up his hand. I swear on the sacred flames of the sun goddess. A smile broke out. Now go, I've stocked the freezer with enough ice cream even Naruto shouldn't be able to eat it all. And you both picked out movies, so you can't possibly complain. For a moment, it looked like his younger self might make the attempt anyway, but he rolled his eyes and followed the Uzumaki back into the house. Well, now that we've gotten all the responsible adulting out of the ways, chirped Kakashi, who was looking far more chipper than any man should at 7:30 p.m., it is now my responsibility as a jonin to get you absolutely wasted. The men strolled out of the Uchiha district, giving a lazy salute to the deliberately visible silhouette of Mongoose, on babysitting duty. Indra had gone out drinking with his sensei in his past life, but that had been when he was married, divorcing, and remarried, while Kakashi still had to maintain the reputation of the former 6th Hokage. None of this was the case now and, the two most eligible bachelors in the Leaf Village, were going to have a night on the town. Because this was Kakashi, who planned everything, even his leisure activities, the Haytake had developed a 3-point route through the market district to pregame, then a 12 to 17-point route through the bars of the Red Lantern district, depending on how drunk they were and what interests they had. Indra actually found himself rather touched. Still, he could feel a headache coming on. It wasn't the heated argument with Sasuke earlier over the Sound Orphans who wanted to join the Uchiha district, but rather, Kakashi's continued presence as he walked through the suddenly too familiar streets. The Leaf Village of his childhood and the Leaf Village of his adult life kept awkwardly intersecting in his mind and it was maddening. As a genin he hadn't taken note of where the bars had been, and the ones he'd frequented in the rebuilt Leaf Village mostly didn't exist yet. He rounded on Kakashi, who was writing notes in a small booklet. So are you going to hide behind Ika like you normally do or am I going to have an actual conversation with you for once? Ma, Indra-san, I'm going to write up a whole report on which fine establishment you'll grace with your presence. You'll have to beat off the ladies with a stick. Beat off the ladies. Kakashi had provided ample rope, and Indra let him hang himself as the silence stretched. Only a figure of speech. Besides, I have a bet to win. HN. Money's split between weepy drunk or angry drunk. No, I won't say where my money is. Professional courtesy, of course. Indra rolled his eye, which was both less visible and ineffective. You all had nothing better to do on guard duty. Hey, guard duty is a highly coveted, dangerous series of assignments. Running a betting pool? You're a shinobi, don't act so superior. Indra smirked. Just surprised you told me, considering I might ruin your bet. Kakashi had the grace to look affronted. I didn't even tell you how I bet. Take her right here, we're hitting Hosengo's grill first. A few minutes later both shinobi had perched themselves on bar stools and were nursing beers. Kakashi was looking forward to seeing how unsettled Indra would be when the copy ninja could drink his way through an evening without actually showing his face. Unfortunately, Indra wasn't peering at him the way other ninja did when he joined them at the bar. For once, Kakashi was going to have to be the one to bring someone out of their shell. How odd. So, I was curious. Indra turned to look at Kakashi with a vaguely interested expression as he downed half his glass in one long pull. A dangerous trait for a ninja. You're mysterious enough to make the Umbu commander tear out their hair, so sue me. Just wondering, you invoke Amaterasu, the sun goddess, more than most Konoha ninja. Any particular reason for that? Indra shrugged. For a while, I didn't think gods were real. If they were, pretty sure they hated me. But I had a few encounters that made me rethink that. Interested in sharing any of these moments of divine enlightenment? Not particularly. But I figure if I'm going to be invoking any gods, it might as well be the one Madara named several jutsu after. Besides, at my age, the idea of an afterlife is more of a comfort. Kakashi gave Indra a flat look, which was impressive considering how 85% of his face was covered. You're only a few years older than me, don't go talking like some kind of old man. Indra's grin was small, but definitely present. Kakashi, we'll both be old men before you know it. Enjoy that youthful metabolism while it lasts. Spoken like someone who can't hold his liquor. Indra wordlessly drained the rest of his glass. Next bar then. Off they went. A black nothingness intruded upon the world of the Uchiha district, in a shadow-covered corner of what had once been Hominko Uchiha's back garden. Lines reached from the point, the black void eternally hungry for purchase upon the material world as it relinquished its master once more, but Obito Uchiha was long accustomed to the pull of his Kamui dimension. He ran one gloved hand through his short black hair and sighed, more a forced release of tension than any real relief. These streets held many memories for him, most of them bad. Ostracization and isolation early in life, then a night of sweet bloody vengeance upon the clan that had abandoned him, left him for dead, and now consisted of 4 Uchiha in the world, only 2 of whom were officially loyal to the Leaf Village. Obito was here to check on them both. This was partially for his own benefit, but also because, in an unusual move, Itachi had asked him to. Neither Uchiha trusted the other one bit, but Sasuke's older brother had been sent on a long-range scouting mission to the Hidden Stone with Chozo to track down one of the sage's 10 rings. While Kakuzu and Konan had both questioned the need for S-class ninja to hunt mere baubles, Pain's reassurance that the rings were needed to ensure a safe sealing process of the tailed beasts had settled the matter. Their initial attempt to seal the 5 tails had only barely succeeded and had resulted in the deaths of 2 previous members. Deidara the explosive expert had meant to be a replacement, but Obito realized he was grinding his teeth and stopped, drifting silently from shadow to shadow as he moved across the Uchiha estate. Things were proceeding smoothly, he reassured himself, only half believing it. He was adaptable, clever, powerful, that was why Madara had given him his name, was why he had enlisted multiple S-class ninja, including one who had the potential to be a second sage of 6 paths. The death of a few prospective members, Orochimaru's defection, and the return of an unexpected Uchiha were only mild changes in the grand scheme. He could and would adapt. Their recent heist in grass had boosted the Akatsuki's coffers significantly, so seeking out more ninja was no great trouble. His little civil war in the Mist Village, which brought him no end of delight, was entering its 3rd year, and several promising individuals on both sides could be lured away with the right incentives. Such as immunity from the 4th Mizukage's infamous retributive rage. One such candidate even now, dwelt in the house ahead of him. Obito heard the scuff of a boot on roof tiles and pressed against the alley wall, his unmarked robe making him nearly invisible in the winter night. He'd foregone his orange mask in favor of a more subdued black and silver ensemble which would mask his visage in a storm, but he still didn't want to be seen. The Uchiha heard a heavy breath as someone walked along the wall above him and the sound of gloved hands rubbing together with a muffled curse. Damn Kakashi, that card-counting bastard. I knew he was angling for something when he suggested we bet favors. Then I'd be at home in bed instead of freezing my tail off out here guarding a couple of kids. Obito cocked his head. If an Umbu was guarding multiple children, that meant a high-value client sequestered in the mostly abandoned Uchiha district for their safety. Something worth checking on, if only out of espionage habit and pure mercenary value. Kakuzu's lectures about money might have rubbed off on him more than he'd thought. As the Umbu moved off through the darkening night, Obito followed silently, becoming more and more certain of their destination with each turn. The Umbu hopped down to land in the street in front of the Uchiha clan head's house with a slight grunt as Obito silently brought up his hands in a battle stance. If the man turned, Obito would kill him before he could even scream. But Mongoose was cold, grumpy, and only interested in getting out of the biting wind, so the lanky man opened Itaka's old window and slipped into the Uchiha household. Obito stood there in the shadowy street, mind racing. An Umbu sent to guard multiple children inside the Uchiha clan head's house, highly likely one of them was Sasuke Uchiha. He'd promised Itaka that he would check on his younger brother and, despite all his attempts to bury it, Obito did feel a slight twinge of kinship with the other Uchiha genius. Slaughtering all your other relatives wasn't a healthy family activity by any stretch, but it meant Obito hadn't dismissed Itaka's request out of hand. For the reserved Uchiha to ask him for anything meant a great deal, and Obito intended to cash in that favor at some point. Agent Mongoose ahead of him proved how important it was for one ninja to owe another a favor. Unfortunately, it would cost this leaf shinobi his life. Indra and Kakashi were 6 bars deep into their adventure and were reaching the precipice that separated casual drinking and a more concentrated effort to get hammered. The copy ninja was ambling along at Indra's side and letting the man continue the argument some brash Chunin had started about the limitations of water-style jutsu. Indra was gesticulating angrily with both his arm and stump, while Kakashi was trying to come up with some way to calm his drinking partner down. So yes, there are environmental limitations, but that's only if you're a pea-brained idiot. The humidity in the air of Fire Country and most of the southern peninsula is perfectly workable. Hells, Mistnin can use the spit in their mouths, so tell me how that's an environmental restriction. I don't think I've seen anyone create a great water dragon from nothing, but that's about it. You ever see anything like that, Kakashi? The gray-haired man racked his alcohol-soaked brain. Nothing. Say, do you have the time? Indra checked his watch, which mercifully diverted his train of thought. 10:17 p.m. What, you thinking of tapping out? Kakashi huffed in exasperation. I'm not the one who will be walking 2 noisy brats to school tomorrow, I'll get to sleep in. If you didn't have the wingman capability of a wet dish rag, I would have gone home with someone already. Indra closed his eyes and looked like he was reconsidering every one of his life choices, which Kakashi thought was unfair. You just want to have the satisfaction of watching me puke because you're irritated you lost your Umbu bet. I never said which way I bet. Bakakashi, I'm drunk and only mostly blind. You bet I'd be a weepy drunk and are disappointed I'm argumentative, because it punctures your whole, effortlessly cool, attitude. Both men looked at one another, equally surprised at the nickname that had slipped out of Kakashi's mouth. Kakashi was having many and varied memories assault his brain of the other dark-haired Uchiha who'd called him that, while Indra was kicking himself for bringing up the very sensitive subject of Obito Uchiha. The moment broke when a posse of equally drunk women barreled through the space between them and sent Indra stumbling back into the wall. The man shook his head and immediately turned green but swallowed heavily and rallied. All right then, if you're so concerned for my future well-being alongside your dick, let's hit up one more bar and call it a night. How's that sound, Kakashi? Works just fine for me, said the Kopinin with only a little stiffness. Which bar did you want to close the night with anyway? Where are we headed? Indra felt the corners of his mouth twitch. On a dangerous mission deep into hostile territory, you've got my back. For all the full levity, Kakashi sensed the sincerity of the question. Indra trusted him, for some reason, and now Kakashi would offer that trust in return, no matter how tentatively. Like a flak jacket. Good, because we're heading to uproar. You keep doing this thing, Indra-san, grumbled Kakashi, where you know way more than you should and it's creeping me out. When did I mention I was interested in men? Just after that round of shots in bar number 5, when you were needling me about what it was like to be married, twice. Plus, I was traveling the continent, not blind, deaf, and dumb. It's a bar called Uproar for a reason. A bar off the beaten path in the Leaf Village, a place you haven't been in years. It's memorable. When you said dangerous mission, you weren't kidding. It'll be like throwing sushi to a pack of sharks. Now you're exaggerating, Kakashi. The lighting is low enough I probably won't be recognized. You do know the Uchiha don't exactly have the best reputation at Uproar. Neither do ex-Umbu agents, so we're in the same boat. I can't believe this. The corners of Indra's mouth were definitely pointed up. You can walk away at any time. Those who abandon their comrades, cited Kakashi solemnly, holding up one finger, are worse than scum. He hoped Obito wasn't actually watching through his Sharingan from up in the Pure Lands, because he was pretty sure the boy would have died twice over from shame alone. Obito removed his mask and went through the wall, drifting intangibly like the ghost he was. The intelligence he'd rifled through in Umbu HQ earlier in the evening had a photo of Indra Uchiha paper clipped to the man's case file, which already looked worn and dog-eared for its few months of existence. In a stroke of luck, they both had lost the same eye, so in a dark hallway, the brief moment of mistaken identity would give Obito enough time to seize control of any situation. Only problem was, he had no idea what the clan head house was like. Sure, the young Obito had walked past it several times, and had been scolded by Sayaka Uchiha and then Fugaku on several occasions, but he'd never been inside. For the massacre, Itaki had insisted this was his task alone, so Obito had left the boy to his patricide. So he listened for the silence of the old wooden house to reveal its secrets to him. The slight creak of wooden boards as Mongoose moved away down the corridor, mumbling something about the warmth of a stove or a kotsu. The distant noise of a television, the nearly imperceptible noise of an old house settling in the winter. The intermittent sounds of snoring. Obito nodded to himself as he confirmed the rough location of the current occupants. Walls were no obstacle for him, so it was best if he dealt with the Umbu first. Returning to the familiar dissociative feeling that accompanied his intangibility, the Uchiha moved soundlessly across the floor and through several walls, emerging in the corridor just behind Mongoose. The assassin made no sound and gave off no smell, but the sixth sense for danger all Umbu developed meant Mongoose sensed his assailant anyway. The Inuzuka's arm hair stood on end as he spun, claws lashing out at neck height and halting as he saw the glimmer of a single red Sharingan and short black hair. Indra-san, was all he got out before Obito's hand passed into his chest and crushed the ninja's heart inside his body. One of his most efficient and least noticeable assassination techniques, leaving no external blood splatter and causing nearly instantaneous death to any target. The key word was nearly, because for Mongoose, that gave him several crucial seconds to fight back. The chill spreading through his body meant the Inuzuka was already dead, but as he opened his mouth to cry out, to warn the boys, to get them to run, a second hand reached up to crush his throat. Both of Mongoose's hands came up to clench around Obito's wrist even as the arm solidified to crush his windpipe. Obito's eye widened as the man's grip tightened on his arm and refused to let go, the classic dead man's grip. Mongoose's eyes were rapidly losing life, but remained ferocious, the primal glare of a pack hunter defending the vulnerable. As Obito returned his second arm to intangibility and withdrew it, the Inuzuka's hands flashed through several hand signs, turning as black as pitch. The Uchiha only had time to think, that's Kakuzu's Earth Grudge technique, before hardened fists sliced through an arm that was suddenly very, very tangible. Both men stumbled back, Obito clutching his wrist as whitish fluid dripped down his artificial limb, and he quickly wrapped it in his cloak to ensure not a drop landed on the floor of the Uchiha hallway. Mongoose's knees were weakening as the foreign object inside his chest cavity tangled with vital blood vessels and his knees hit the wooden planks with a thump. Obito swooped forward to suck the rest of the man into his kamui and the corpse disappeared without a sound. He forced his breathing to slow and strained his hearing, but the house didn't stir. That had been unexpected in the extreme, but even here, there was a lesson. If Kakuzu's technique, or something similar could somehow penetrate his kamui's space-time, it was now a weakness he was aware of. Arrogance was dangerous, even for him. Orochimaru's death had proven that in spades. And now the house was undefended. The ghost of the Uchiha clan kept moving, glancing into each room and finding evidence of life, but no occupants. A clean, regimentally ordered room that was doubtless Sasuke's, a second bedroom absolutely covered with scrolls, stacks of instant ramen, an overflowing laundry hamper and several abandoned dishes. A kitchen that was a mixture of both, with piles of drying dishes and bowls, but with the remains of several pints of ice cream leaning against the garbage can. The flickering light and noise of the TV was very close now, and Obito slowed still further as his eye scanned the room, glowing a soft red as it memorized the scene. Two children lay unconscious, mostly hidden under the warmth of a kotsu blanket. Black hair and pale skin meant the closest was obviously Sasuke Uchiha, so Obito took the time to study the boy. He appeared to be in good health, no obvious wounds, and though his face frowned in his sleep, he seemed less troubled than expected. Itachi would be pleased to receive this report, and Obito would be pleased to deliver it. One dark eye cracked open and a sleep-heavy voice drifted out. "Uncle? How'd it go?" Obito's whirl-shaped scars were hidden by the backlight of the TV, so all Sasuke saw was a glowing red Sharingan and the familiar cloaked and one-armed silhouette of his uncle. The older Uchiha couldn't wink, so he settled for a thumbs up and drifted out of the boy's line of sight, a genjutsu at the front of his mind in case the boy roused further. Sasuke's eye closed again and a small smile passed across his face as he fell back asleep. The other body in the room shifted in its sleep as Obito's world froze as he looked down at the blonde he'd threatened to kill 10 years earlier. Uzumaki Naruto, the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki. Minato's son. The boy's expression was pained in his sleep and both his hands absently rubbed at his stomach, partially revealed by his sprawl across several pillows. The Uchiha leaned closer and saw black ink spiral into existence, a seal of staggering complexity and strength. Kurama stalked back and forth within the sleeping mind of Naruto Uzumaki. He'd been glutted on more Uchiha nightmares and was taking some time to enjoy the feeling of freedom from that golden cage, however temporary, when someone had entered the room. Sasuke had opened his eyes, more asleep than awake, had seen his uncle move through the room and returned to slumber. But Kurama had seen that eye before, had felt the bottomless abyss of loathing that walked as a man. A soul now stained anew with the scent of kinslaying. Madara Uchiha. "He is here," growled Kurama to himself. His one-time captor, who had ripped him from Kushina and enslaved him, set the power of the Nine Tails upon the Leaf Village, was so close he could touch both Naruto and Sasuke. The Nine Tails' first instinct, of course, was to attack. Rouse the boys, cajole the Uzumaki brat to give him control, and fight the man off. Except even with his might, this was still a child's body, with a child's chakra pathways. Naruto had grown inside Kushina's womb, mere inches away from the metaphysical space that held Kurama also, and the fox's chakra had marked the boy even before he was a Jinchuriki. As weak he was now, Naruto would be able to bear far more of Kurama's toxic chakra than any other living human. A full tale, perhaps. 2. If the Uzumaki didn't mind dying in defense of his friend, which was always Kushina's weakness as well. But it still wouldn't be enough. Those damnable eyes, that cursed power of the old man's first, arrogant son, would stop them. Madara, even if he was not the genuine article, was still mighty enough to bind them, kill them all, thanks to the Reaper Death Seal which bound his soul to the Uzumaki Ransone. The nine-tailed fox let out a snarl of frustration that caused Naruto's stomach to burn slightly, though that could have just been all the junk food he'd eaten. Kurama, the nine burning rages, the cleansing flames of the kami, was a predator through and through, in form and function and might. For centuries, nothing and no one on the continent had thought to challenge him, but now, he was trapped. Forced into the role of prey, and he hated it with a white-hot rage that made the Reaper Death Seal vibrate with the force of his anger and humiliation. Especially because the man in the room, who he could not see, but could absolutely feel, was wickedness incarnate. The old man had charged Kurama with eradicating and devouring the wickedness of man, and here was one who embodied all that the Nine Tails was charged to destroy. If he'd been younger, trapped for anything less than 110 years, Kurama might still have fought. His pride as a tailed beast would have demanded it. But he had been trapped for 110 years and had gained in patience what he'd lost in dignity. A fight against the same Uchiha who'd kidnapped him before would simply end in the same result, in defeat, and perhaps an even worse imprisonment. The nine-tailed fox reached out with his senses, feeling for the icy hatred, and held a breath he didn't need to take. When they had started walking, Indra hadn't intended to go to Uproar. He'd intended to circle back to Hosengo's grill, a quiet place suitable for a nightcap and several glasses of water. But Kakashi had been distracting and Indra found himself relaxing more and more. In his time, The master-pupil dynamic had long faded and Sasuke found himself slipping back into the easy familiarity with his old teacher who was somehow more open and relaxed than he'd been teaching a bunch of genin in peacetime. Whatever Naruto, Sakura, and Sasuke had gotten up to in the months he'd been out of commission or weeks hunting Orochimaru, it must have been miraculous. And so, he'd taken a risk, going to Uproar. He was sure Kakashi had instructions to try and gain more info on the inscrutable Indra Uchiha, but the Yamanaka mind sublimation jutsu would hold even against deep intoxication. Besides, he hadn't told the last Hatake anything even approaching mission critical. Good-naturedly complaining about how his ex-wife had destroyed 3 separate walls in fits of anger had brought a rare laugh out of Kakashi, who had admitted that the mysterious Uzumaki shared a great deal in common with Kushina. Indra idly wondered where the Sakura of his time had ended up. While her silence and absence from Konoha was somewhat unnerving, he knew the Kunoichi could take care of herself. She would have wanted him to have fun, had encouraged it, in fact. Admittedly, Uproar wasn't exactly what she'd had in mind back then either. Uproar was 3 streets away from Naruto's old apartment and was fairly typical of the Red Lamp district. A sign and a graffiti-covered stairway led into a basement crowded with shinobi holding drinks and dim purple lighting. It was the oldest, raunchiest, and most historic gay bar in Konoha. Uproar had been dug out and built as a residential basement during the time of the first Hokage but had swiftly been repurposed by Goran Shimura and Tsuinko Hyuga by the time the second took the hat. Tsuinko had been using the Byakugan to both scan customers and keep an eye out for the Konoha police force while Shimura had connected the bar to the deep network of tunnels and passageways underneath Konoha he'd designed himself, just in case the occupants needed to make a quick getaway. They didn't even have a formal liquor license. The bar existed quietly for a few years, without a name, with little incident besides a few quiet, laughing disappearances when an Uchiha with a police force patch came knocking. Then the second Hokage got wind of it. No one knew how, but he sent in an Umbu force to discreetly take names and ranks, resulting in an uproar that led to the death of one of the Umbu and put nearly a fifth of the active duty Leaf Ninja in the hospital after either participating in or attempting to suppress the riot. To this day, the experienced bartenders glowered at anyone with an Umbu tattoo on their shoulder the first 6 months they showed up there. Even the sign had been a recent, careful addition. As a result of long familiarity with events that had helped give Uproar its name, there was a strict no-weapons policy, with full-body checks at the door. Indra passed over his cloak and purple scarf, and a brief scan by the bouncer's Byakugan showed he was clean. Kakashi, on the other hand, had to relinquish not just the contents of his flak jacket, but 2 hidden kunao and a roll of razor wire, which he submitted to with a great deal of grumbling in Indra's direction. You know, Indra-san, if you wanted to sleep with me, you could have just asked. The Uchiha's glare was so strong a potted plant in the corner wilted. Not in a million years, Hatake. You're an even worse disaster than my husband, but against my better judgment, I'll try to set you up with a date anyway. Everything after that is on you. Kakashi caught the bartender's eye and made a complicated series of hand gestures which Indra didn't bother to watch. You realize all your dark clothing will have you blend into the background entirely, right? Not very good wingman behavior. Well, I know a little thing or two about lurking, piped up a familiar baritone. The key is to look suave, really gets the ladies interested. Gets them to come to you. Jiraiya twitched his thick white eyebrows suggestively and made a curling motion with his 2 middle fingers. Kakashi shrank into the crowd around the bar while Indra folded his arms, his own forehead creased with disapproval. He didn't know it, but in that moment, his expression was a mirror image of Fugaku Uchiha's. Not really my thing. Just as this bar isn't really your thing, Jiraiya-san. The big man snorted and tossed back a shot of something bright blue, throwing his hair over his shoulder. Well, I figured it was about time I catch up on the Leaf Village's local nightlife, what can I say? It certainly has its perks. A hand dipped down towards a dancing woman's rear, but never reached its target. Indra no longer had his instant transmission technique, Amen Otashikara, but he was still much faster than an ordinary shinobi. A pulse of lightning chakra through his system closed the distance and his hand closed around Jiraiya's wrist in a potentially bone-crushing grip. At the door, the Hyuga bouncer's head turned their way. This isn't the time or place for that, said Sasuke in a light tone that was equal parts warning and friendly advice. I would have thought a sage understood common respect, but so far, you've disappointed me. The girl shot him a grateful look and moved deeper into the crowd, away from them. If she's here, she's not interested in you. Kakashi wandered back with 2 drinks, one of which sported a large green curly straw. Now, Indra-san, have you heard of the bendy seduction technique? What's going on here? A disappointing godfather, said Indra shortly as he released Jiraya's wrist, and he was satisfied to see the white-haired man shoot a surprised glance at Kakashi. The man handed Indra his drink to cover his returning shrug of equal bewilderment. Both turned back to Indra, whose mood had returned to cautiously sanguine as the mulled wine burned through him. So, Master Jiraiya, I'm assuming you sought us out for a reason. The man nodded and shifted to stand next to them along the wall, his eyes following the flow of the crowd as the bouncer turned away from them. Though his face retained a jovial smile, and his body was relaxed, something about the Toad Sage had shifted. Now he wasn't just Naruto's dearly loved pervy sage, but Konoha's spy master. I must say, you're a lot like your father, Indra Uchiha. Stiff, difficult to joke with, but loyal to Konoha. Loyal to Konoha's people, said Indra. Konoha itself in an idea. One that has failed to protect my clan. Keep that in mind, spy master. Oh, believe me, I am, grumbled Jiraiya. Still, our mutual friends in high places wanted me to ask you about this. He dug in an inner pocket and produced a small silver ring, made for fingers far smaller than his own. But when the sage made to slide it onto his finger, the metal seemed to subtly expand until it could comfortably fit his wide-knuckled digits. Kakashi whistled. Now that's a nifty bit of jutsu work, where'd you get that done? The Land of Lightning. Jiraiya shook his head, somewhere considerably further away. He showed the face of it to Indra and Kakashi, and it glimmered as it reflected the multicolored lights all around them. A slate blue gemstone engraved with the kanji for sky. Recognize it? Kakashi sucked noisily on his bendy straw, which meant no, but something was tickling the back of Indra's mind. Rings, rings, a blond man with mouths in his hands scattering clay spiders from above as the sunlight glinted off the shine of a silver ring. A blood-stained hand reaching for Sasuke's forehead as a ring slipped off to clatter into the rocks around them. Dark men around a stone table, 3 of whom sported lone rings on different fingers. Indra motioned for it and the Toad Sage handed the trinket over. Maybe, he admitted. Is this about that group our friends upstairs are so concerned about? Yes, we found it among my old teammate's belongings, cleaning out his apartment the other day. Jiraiya gave another one of his boisterous laughs. He always was a hoarder, so much stuff in there it took us ages to sort through it all. And this ring is significant because... Jiraiya reached over to steal Indra's drink and his hand moved through 6 hand signs around the cup as he withdrew and pretended to fumble the cup. Ah, sorry about that. Getting old usually means clumsy fingers. Just as long as they're more experienced. He winked at Indra as the pulsing beats around them lessened slightly and the shouted conversations around them faded into background murmurs. Muffling an anti-surveillance wind jutsu, we have 10 minutes to speak freely, then I'll let you get back to whatever it was you were doing. Won't people notice they can't hear us? I prepared a little something in advance. Everyone outside this jutsu will just hear us talking about how difficult it is to move apartments. Indra was reluctantly impressed as Jiraiya took the ring back. Like I said, this is Orochimaru's trinket, and as I'm sure you noticed when you killed him, he didn't really go for rings. No, the original owner of this ring was the Sage of 6 Paths. Kakashi's supposed bendy seduction technique turned into a hacking cough as alcohol went down the wrong pipe. You're joking, he gasped, pounding at his chest while the others looked on. The Sage of 6 Paths is just a legend to explain the origin of chakra. Right up there with stories of monsters in the dark or beneath the sea. Indra just locked his gaze on Jiraiya's face. How many rings are there, and what do they do? The Toad Sage looked grim. This is all hearsay, understand? I got this story from my own master, the great Toad Elder of Mount Myaboku, decades ago. Never put any stock in it until today when Sarutobi showed me this. Not exactly the latest literature from Kinshin University. Just get to the point, snapped Indra. The alcohol was making him more impatient than he normally would be, and he couldn't decide if Jiraiya had planned his arrival to goad him for just this reaction. But the white-haired man didn't visibly react. Long ago, the sage sought to spread his teachings of ninjutsu, alongside ones of love and understanding across the world. But he was only one man, so he fostered disciples. Rich, poor, young, old, men, women, didn't matter. Not that rich and poor was much of a distinction in those days. The sage's 9 best disciples were sent out into the world to preach and to teach the world how to safely utilize chakra. To keep tabs on them across this vast continent, the sage created 9 rings that would ensure their safety, and a master ring for himself. The disciples' rings were named for each of the meditative poses key to reaching enlightenment and served as spiritual guideposts for their bearers. We tested this one and it set off a ceiling barrier that trapped Danzo in his office for half the day. Indra snickered, only to fall silent at the thunderous look on Jiraiya's face. This is no laughing matter, Uchiha. Blood of the gods, don't you realize what these can do? Enlighten us, then. These rings make it easier to seal the tailed beasts. It's how the Akatsuki wants to keep track of their members running around the continent doing who knows what. They're seeking these rings out as we speak. Indra had never sobered up so quickly in his life and fought to keep his expression disinterested. How many do they have now? Can you guess where any of them are now? If I knew that, I'd be out there hunting the damned baubles, not sitting in a basement with you idiots. Hey, piped up Kakashi, attempting to lighten the mood. That's hurtful. Look, Uchiha-san. You seem to make a habit of knowing things you really shouldn't, so if you have even an inkling of where they might be, spit it out. Indra was silent as he thought back to his extensive research on the Otsutsuki ruins after the war. Compared to the archaeologists, he was an enthusiastic amateur with some flashy jutsu. Still, if this was the all-hands-on-deck situation Jiraiya made it sound like, it could also be a huge boon. In his first life, no one had really thought about how several S-class ninja had managed to seal 7-tailed beasts inside a questionably sentient corpse. Given the number of ridiculously insane things that occurred in the Fourth Great Ninja War, that was small potatoes. But now there was a chance. Find enough of the rings before the Akatsuki, and that would make the tailed beast sealings riskier. Perhaps it would take longer, perhaps they would fail, perhaps the Akatsuki members would be eaten alive by the statue instead of the Jinchuriki. That last one was probably just wishful thinking. There were so many other ways this could go wrong, but if the villages gathered enough of the rings, kept them out of the Akatsuki's hands, they could shut down a majority of Obito's med plan without a single kunai thrown in anger. At least initially, because Obito wasn't going to take that lying down. The man had the craftiness of Danzo and twice the bastardry. Indra blinked. You have something I can write with. Jiraiya produced a pencil and Kakashi offered the crumpled drink receipt from his pocket. Good enough. The Uchiha scribbled out a list of 6 names all across the elemental nations, great and small. Here's a few archaeologists to start with. Get some of your people into the area and tell them to run if a hint of red clouds show up. We both need the scholars alive, but the Akatsuki would kill them just to deny us the source of information. Appreciate the help, Uchiha-san, said the Toad Sage as he pushed away from the wall. Anything else you've got before I drop this muffling jutsu? Indra thought about following his Naruto out into the forests of Konoha, standing behind him as the man laid out a few offerings. A bouquet of flowers, a cup of sake, salted cod. A grave denoted with ninja wire and kunai, surrounding a single stone plinth, carved with care for all its amateurish style. He thought about late-night conversations illuminated only by the light above the kitchen table as he'd listened blearily. Jiraiya might not have been someone he personally liked, but perhaps Naruto would. Indra had already stolen a father figure position from Umino Irika, he couldn't begrudge Jiraiya his allotted spot in Naruto's heart. If the man wanted it. I'm afraid I must have given you a bad impression tonight, Jiraiya-san, he replied. If you ever want to visit Naruto, or to join us for dinner, the Uchiha district will be open to you. The Toad Sage's face did a complicated dance between guilt, regret, and hopefulness that Indra recognized. He'd seen it on his own face in the evenings often enough, wishing things would turn out better this time. Well, that is a mighty tempting offer, Indra Uchiha. I'll have to think on that. Jiraiya of the Sun raised a hand in farewell and moved off into the crowd as the sound of the club came roaring back in at full volume. Indra and Kakashi both winced, looked at one another, then at Indra's empty hand. By unspoken agreement, they went back for more drinks. Indra noticed the Toad Sage had never actually accepted the offer. Chapter 35, Much Ado About Nothing. What about that guy at 2:15, with the gem earring? Indra sipped his drink and watched a thoroughly inebriated Kakashi study the subject of their conversation across the bar. After Jiraiya had left, both ninja had realized there was nothing to be done at that moment and had decided to make the most of the evening that remained to them. So both elite ninja were well on their way to getting plastered and playing hot or not. Kakashi made a non-committal noise through his mask and toyed with his straw. He's got a nice jawline, but look, a lip piercing. That a deal breaker? Not really, I just don't like the idea of it catching on my mouth, personally. That sounds like a deal breaker, Kakashi. Your turn. The Chunin 4 seats to his left, with the beer foam mustache. The guy who guards the Konoha gates. Am I judging him with or without the mustache? Kakashi took a long, noisy sip of his cocktail. Whichever way most informs your decision. Indra considered the man who had turned and was making short, excited gestures with one hand to the very embarrassed and awkward-looking man next to him, who looked kind of familiar. Without the mustache, he's fairly average-looking, but it gives him a goofy charm. His companion chuckled. A smooth talker like you goes for the goofy ones? Not what I would have expected. Indra thought about his Naruto, sitting at a dinner table with him and watching the man drape noodles across his face in his haste to devour the meal as Boruto and Sarada shared a long-suffering look between them. Sasuke's face had been plastered with the kind of soft smile only Naruto could draw out of him with regularity, because his husband was an absolute idiot. Yes, he said softly. It's a critical weakness. Kakashi realized Indra was inside his own head and waited patiently for the Uchiha to pull out of whatever memory he was engrossed in. As he waited, the Kopinen's eye was drawn to the man next in line at the bar and nearly choked on his drink. The sound of muffled sputtering behind a mask drew Indra back to the present and he raised one eyebrow as Kakashi elbowed him in the side. What? Does that Chunin next to foam mustache look familiar to you? It took him impressive amount of effort for Indra to keep a straight face as he answered. That's Naruto's teacher. Umino Iruka wanted to sink into the floor and dearly wished he knew that sort of earth jutsu. Izumo and Kotetsu were celebrating their second anniversary and, for reasons unknown to a more sensible shinobi, had decided Iruka needed to get out of his shell. So, they dragged him to Uproar, a bar that was the absolute opposite of a bookish administrative chunin in his mid-20s. Iruka's idea of a good time was a night inside with a good adventure story, not a crowded, slightly smelly bar full of inebriated shinobi and friends who seemed determined to send him home with someone. Iruka sighed into his beer and drank as Kotetsu grinned at his partner. The Chunin teacher knew they meant well, because he'd been avoiding the dating scene for some time, wrapping himself in lesson plans and jutsu scrolls, and he really did need to put himself out there, just. His train of thought stuttered to a halt as he saw who was on the other side of the bar, deep in conversation. Sasuke's uncle, the famously mysterious Indra Uchiha. And next to him was Hatake Kakashi, the ninja who'd been voted most attractive jonin in Konoha last month. He'd met Indra twice, not counting the man's arrival by falling into a sandbox, and he'd been succinct, respectful, and curious about Iruka's lesson plans. By contrast, the 2 times Kakashi's grey mop of hair had shown up to drag Indra's semi-adopted children away from the training yards, he'd been talkative and effortlessly suave. Iruka was a little regretful that both men seemed to have taken over his infrequent role as Naruto's parental substitute, because Iruka really had wanted to befriend the boy further. Even with all his pranks and outbursts, the blonde still always had a smile on his face. He was a good kid, and Iruka wished he could have done more than a box of medical supplies and a few trips to Ichiraku's. So, anyone catch your eye, said Kotetsu as the man wiggled his eyebrows at the third wheel of this evening. You've been pretty quiet. Iruka hitched his mouth up into an unconvincing smile. Just spotted Hatake Kakashi at 11:15 with a curly straw. Want us to go make introductions? I'm sure we've got enough gossip about him to fill you in on some great rumors. Iruka's stare was flat and unimpressed. He's a jonin who's obviously ex-umbu, you two guard the front gate, and I'm a teacher. None of us run in the same circles. Sure he's hot, but what could we possibly have in common? Kotetsu swallowed and tapped Irika's shoulder as the Chunin tossed back the dregs of his drink. Listen, thanks for bringing me out and for covering my drink, but I think I'm going to head out. You two have fun, it's your anniversary. Irika. He turned, prepared to ignore whatever feeble protest Kotetsu had and head for the door, only to find a masked ninja hovering behind him, hands deep in his pockets. Indra not so subtly pushed Kakashi forward and Irika's mind snapped to the rote teacher's greeting he'd performed dozens of times. His hand came up and eyes met Kakashi's cyclops gaze. At least the copy ninja looked just as nervous as he did. Hey Take-san, it's nice to meet you. Again. I don't think we had much time to speak before. Indra-san, likewise, it's a pleasure. Indra nodded a silent greeting as Kakashi shook the teacher's hand. So, what brings Konoha's best teacher out to a place like this? I'm impressed, I didn't think uproar was really your style. Irika flushed in the compliment and kept shaking Kakashi's hand because he had nothing better to do. Really, it's not, I just came out to celebrate my friend's anniversary. Do you come here often, Kakashi? It's certainly, his mind flailed as he tried to find a balance between accurately describing the bar and not insulting the very attractive Jonin in front of him. Unique. Indra was smirking now and looked over at Kotetsu as a silent understanding passed between them. Congratulations, then. How long have you been together? Kotetsu leaned back on the bar, affecting nonchalance. Oh, Izumo and I have been going steady 2 years now, let me introduce you. Both men grabbed Izumo and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Irika and Kakashi adrift. The copynin looked down at their hands still moving up and down in a robotic handshake. You can let go of my hand now. Irika's grip disengaged so quickly it looked like he'd tripped an exploding tag. Sorry. Kakashi let out a brief chuckle, more a bark of amusement, and Irika hoped this was a good sign. Unique is one of the more flattering words I've heard used to describe this place, glad to hear it's made a good impression on you. So have you, said Irika, from a lack of anything else to say. One visible eyebrow raised on the Jonin's face. Oh, and why's that? You mentioned we haven't spoken much. Irika moved back and sat back on his stool as Kakashi leaned against the bar. Well, back when Indra-san fell out of the sky and scared everyone half to death, you got Naruto to safety, which was kind of you. Even if you were just a passing umbu, you didn't have to do that. Well, you had the situation mostly under control, lied Kakashi, only for Irika to laugh in response. It was chaos, and you know it. Still, while Indra-san was in the hospital, I kept hearing Naruto and Sasuke mention your name when they thought I couldn't hear them. Soon enough, they roped in the Harano girl and then things got interesting. Interesting how? Irika laughed again and reached for his drink, only to remember it was empty. Kakashi signaled the bartender and Irika protested. Kakashi, you don't need to buy me a drink. Nonsense, I'm not buying you a drink, I'm buying the rest of this story. Keep going, how did Sakura make this Naruto Sasuke thing more interesting? Well, for one, she managed to drag them into the library, actually had Naruto reading books in his spare time. Then, whatever they were researching about Konoha had them talking about you every third word. First it was just, what would Kakashi-sensei say about this, then it turned into, look at this trick Kakashi-sensei showed me, and Kakashi-sensei did it like this. The bartender handed Irika a full glass and the teacher paused to appreciate the flavor of the beer. So, however you got mixed up in this, it sure seems like those three have picked their Jonin-sensei already. Kakashi's heart twisted slightly in his chest and he took refuge in his own drink to avoid the question for a few precious seconds. Well, I don't know about that, but it's very kind of you to say, Irika-san. At first, it was just a standard bodyguard mission, but they just kept asking the right kind of questions. Next thing I knew, I was teaching them kata forms in the Uchiha dojo and they were trying to beat me to death with sticks. Very unfair, really. Irika smiled at Kakashi over the rim of his glass. They do worm their way into your heart, don't they? I'll drink to that. Their glasses clinked against one another and both men took a moment to study the other. The additional drink had lowered some of Irika's barriers, made him more relaxed as the conversation moved into a discussion of teaching styles. In a bizarre subversion, Iruka found he actually had better advice for Kakashi, and the man accepted it with sincere thanks. He'd expected an experienced, suave Jonin to dominate the conversation, had resigned himself to it, only to find the Kopinen was exceeding his expectations. It was common for higher-level Jonin, especially Umbu, to look down on the Chunin who took less active duty positions, but Kakashi just let him talk. He even complimented Iruka several more times on his methods, about how Naruto and Sakura had spoken of him as an excellent teacher, praising his simple explanations and advanced genjutsu techniques, respectively. Every time, Iruka blushed less and less as the compliments became less obvious praise and simply a part of the conversation's flow. Soon enough, another hour had passed in the blink of an eye, and uproar was getting closer to its namesake. The music got louder, as did the conversations, until Iruka had enough and jerked his head in the direction of the door. "Let's get out of here, I can barely hear you, and lip reading won't work." Kakashi blinked in surprise but nodded as they left a few bills underneath their empty glasses and slipped through the crowd. The coat check delayed them somewhat because while Iruka simply had to shrug back into a mostly empty flak jacket, Kakashi had to store and hide all the ninja tools he normally had somewhere on his person. While the gray-haired man was slipping a kunao into his boot, Iruka's eyes roved over the crowd and found Kotetsu and Izuno in a corner, busy devouring each other's faces. They wouldn't notice if he left. Indra's dark form was nowhere to be seen. Soon enough, both men found themselves outside in the brisk night air, and Iruka was suddenly very glad for the thermal properties of the flax jacket, as well as the long blue sleeves on his arms. He shivered as a gust of wind moved through the street and leaned against the doorway of a nearby building for what meager protection it offered. Kakashi coped him, still somehow managing to be nonchalant, though the man had to be just as cold. He looked up at the streetlight and the full moon above it, hanging in the sky. "It's a nice night," he offered, lamely, as Kakashi's mask creased in a smile. "Yes, it has been, Iruka-san. Your advice was very helpful, and I'm glad you came out." The gray-haired man gave Iruka an appreciative look, and the Chunin felt the moment slow down as the distance between them closed. He wasn't sure if Kakashi was leaning closer or if he was. Maybe both. Either way, he felt masked lips brush against his cheek, just below his ear, as hands moved onto his shoulders. "This is good, right?" purred a voice that was suddenly perfectly audible. "Think you still need to read my lips now?" Iruka felt a waterfall of sweat start to pour down his back as he realized the direction this night was heading and found his voice. Kakashi. Was his voice really that high-pitched and nervous? Oh sage, he felt like a teenager. The Kopinen drew back, and Iruka could see that even through the mask he looked guilty. "Apologies, Iruka-san, if I misread your dash." "And no, it's quite all right," Iruka stammered as he produced a scrap of paper and a pen from his jacket as he searched for the right way to phrase this. "Perhaps, just dash." He abandoned 2 sentences as he scribbled his phone number and shoved the paper into Kakashi's face. "Maybe some other time." The silence stretched for an eternity before Kakashi let out a short breath and tucked the scrap into his own jacket, buttoning the pouch securely to ensure it wouldn't escape. "Sure thing. No hard feelings, right?" "None at all," squeaked Iruka as something resembling a smile moved onto his face. "So, see you later, then." Kakashi winked and waved a hand in farewell. "See you." Iruka's shunshin was textbook perfect as he vanished, moving in the direction of the residential district with his heart in his throat. He wasn't sure if he was happy or mortified, but tonight hadn't turned out the way he'd expected at all. Much better than he'd hoped, for sure. Kakashi stood there alone in the doorway of a deserted street for a few minutes, shoving all of those annoying feelings and desires into a little box in the back of his brain they'd escaped from with the help of a great many drinks. Gods, he needed to piss. He walked a few feet and found a convenient alley used by generations of drunk shinobi before him as he emptied his bladder into a corner. Classy moves, Kakashi. He didn't even turn around as Indra's voice floated down from the roof above him. "You're the one who ditched me in favor of those 2 lovebirds, after proposing we go to uproar in the first place. You already jerked them off on the roof or something." He could hear Indra roll his single eye, somehow in that pointed silence. "I'm married, Kakashi." "And how's that working out for you?" retorted the Kopinen as he zipped up his pants and flipped through the signs for a water jutsu. "Fuck you, Kakashi," said Indra, in a voice that was fonder than recriminating. "I'm heading home." "I'm coming with," protested his companion. "I'll send Mongoose on his way," wanted to thank him for babysitting. We all know that's what it was. Kakshi stepped back out into the street, shaking water from his fingers, as Indra jumped down to walk alongside him. In a dark blue cloak, at this time of night, he was nearly invisible but for the stark contrast of his face emerging from the gloom. They walked in silence for a few minutes in the direction of the Uchiha estate until Kakashi broke it with a sigh as he lost the battle of wills. "So, this is a problem." "What?" "Iruka gave me his number tonight," admitted Kakashi as he stuffed his hands into his pockets once more. "That's good news." "No, it's not, I don't own a phone." Indra stared. "How do you not own a phone?" A miniature Naruto and Sakura inside his head began screeching at him that this was unbelievably hypocritical, considering he'd wandered the elemental nations for decades with only a messenger hawk as a contact point. Combined with his reluctance to use scientific ninja tools or an artificial limb, he was practically a technophobe. Honestly, if they loved him only half as much. Kakashi shrugged, oblivious to the rant Indra endured inside his own head. "Who the hell would call me? Most either drop in or I'm on a mission anyways. Plus the ringing would upset the dogs." Indra slung his arm around Kakashi's shoulders and the two ninjas stumbled their way towards the red torii gate that marked the entrance to the Uchiha district. "Gods, no wonder you've been single so long." The Sakura in Indra's head muttered something about how getting Kakashi-sensei therapy was harder than pulling teeth from Akamaru. A ghost with one eye stood before Naruto Uzumaki, torn between greed, fear, and sudden uncertainty. The boy was vulnerable and could be easily taken. The Umbu guard was dead, the mysterious Indra Uchiha absent, there could be no better moment to take the troublesome Ninetales. Obito's hand moved closer to Naruto Uzumaki's sleeping form before his conscious mind thought better of it and Obito withdrew to the doorway. Sure, he could kidnap Naruto now, could trap his master's son inside the Kamui dimension until the Akatsuki had all the rings to safely remove the Ninetales. But they hadn't found all the rings, it could take years. Was Obito willing to keep a child alive until then? Most of him rebelled against the idea, a large majority really. But there was a very small part. A very small part that had nothing to do with seals on his heart, or the curse of hatred, or traumatizing events. A very small part of Obito Uchiha who remembered what it was like to be a young boy alone in the world, trying very hard to be cheerful and kind, because no one else was. That part thought that even if Obito might not be good for Minato's son, perhaps Minato's son might be good for Obito. His hand was trembling, so he clenched it into a fist and grimaced at his own indecision. He'd confirmed the location and presence of the Ninetales Jinchuriki within the Leaf Village, he'd rifled through the Umbu's most recent intelligence, and he'd confirmed Sasuke's relative good health as a favor for Itachi. All that was left was to find out more about Indra Uchiha. Obito moved back through the house, forcing his mind back into the cold, calculating espionage and assassination professional the Akatsuki had required for years. Dreams were useless and hope was only the precursor to disappointment. Rin and Kakashi had proved it beyond any doubt. The plan was everything, after all. He had nothing else. The Akatsuki's ghost struck gold when he entered the main bedroom and allowed himself a small Uchiha grin, which was more the suggestion of a smile than a real one. His scarring stretched the expression into something terrifying, which was part of the reason he'd kept to masks so often. On the surface, an ordinary bedroom, with a bed, nightstands, and a lamp to one side. But if a man's home was his castle, the bedroom was where his inner self was laid bare. Even Danzo, for all his paranoia, had a few personal touches to his lonely, single bedroom. Obito went through Indra's drawers quickly and dispassionately. A large number of dark cloaks, a collection of eye patches, a selection of medical supplies in the top drawer. A bottle of whiskey, unopened, lay hidden underneath a pile of combat pants. Obito ran a finger across the drawer and the light of the moon showed a coating of dust on his finger. Indra Uchiha had purchased this bottle, but kept it in his bedroom, away from the liquor cabinet, for surreptitious use. The medical supplies in the top drawer suggested a disinfectant usage, but the possibility of alcoholism was equally present. Uchiha were genetically prone to such a weakness, after all. Alternatively, it could be a coping mechanism. What are you trying to forget, I wonder? The bed proved to have even more to say. A standard umbu short sword was taped to the underside of the frame, within easy reach of Indra's arm, while a kunau was stuffed under each side of the mattress. But it was the small collection of parenting books that made Obito's eye gleam with dark promise. Coupled with the presence of the boys outside, it was abundantly clear Indra's heart lay with the children, and Danzo's file had indicated an unknown past relationship with an Uzumaki. Did Indra perhaps not know the power of the boy under his roof? Sarutobi had a habit of playing his cards close to his withered chest, while Danzo was more assertive. The head of Root had been spotted in the battle against Orochimaru, alongside Indra, so perhaps there was already a working relationship for Obito to undermine. With Danzo, familiarity tended to breed contempt. Obito moved to the window and flicked through the books by the moon's light, glowing red eye memorizing each scribbled note, each scrap of Indra's knowledge. Divorce fallout. When to disclose the curse of hatred. Emotional regulation techniques. Preparing them for the truth. When. Teen dating, why it's important for emotional development, Sarada stories. The importance of love. Note to self, read Attack of the Riot Act. Shinobi communication styles, adapting to cross-cultural attitudes. How to maintain old ties while forming new familial bonds. See Kakashi Tree Convo. Corollary, given outcome, not the best example, perhaps. Inoichi. Lure of Power, the Virgil Conundrum. The empty back pages were blank at first, but in a book where even the margins had notes, such a blank canvas was suspicious. Obito's regular Sherry-non saw nothing, but on a whim, he pushed it into the manjikyo and black ink spiraled into existence, written in cramped, slightly wobbly penmanship. The Uchiha's mouth fell open. Somehow, Indra had managed to duplicate the same technique used on the Uchiha stone tablet, which meant he knew of its existence. It made sense if he was truly the clan's bloodline guardian, but it begged the question, what else did he know? Did he know about Madara? Obito swallowed heavily as he considered the distinct possibility and forced himself to focus on the text. 46 years until the invasion, but still so many unanswered questions. Did the Ten Tails' energy summon them? Was it Kageyas? The infinite Tsukuyomi? Unknown. For now, assume invasion inevitable, but halt Akatsuki plans as early as possible. Obito had to stop himself from throwing the book across the room. He knew. Somehow, Indra Uchiha knew their plan and from the sound of it, had known for some time. Not just the idea of the infinite Tsukuyomi, but the intricacies of the Ten Tails' existence, which had passed into myth and legend altogether. The Mad Uchiha searched under the bed again, fingers pressing for any loose floorboards, then back to the dressers for false drawer bottoms, but there was nothing. However Indra Uchiha had learned about the Akatsuki's goals, he'd hidden his sources well. Obito absently noted his grip had tightened so much he was beginning to crack the spine of the book and swiftly eased up as he returned to reading. He had to know more. He had to regain the advantage. Higoromo's disappearance bodes ill, especially with the signs my assailant was in Orochimaru's hands for some time. Celestial Maggots open possibility for further manipulation of its Satsuki genetics. I can only thank Amaterasu that Tsunade Senju's medical advancements stalled with her departure from the Leaf Village. Pursuer death a priority, especially now the danger of reanimation has lessened thanks to our campaign. Multi-nation kill squad ideal, but unlikely. Konoha ninja suitable, Sarutobi Hiruzen, Shimura Danzo, Heitake Kakashi, Jiraiya the Sage, Uchiha Itachi, Yamato of the Wood style, every Umbu and Root agent capable of casting A and S rank ninjutsu. Additional sealing masters ideal, but unlikely. Heitake Kakashi. Obito stared in confusion. If the first paragraph had made entirely too much sense, this second one made too little. The name Hagoromo sounded familiar, but Obito couldn't place when he'd heard it. He'd heard of the Celestial Maggots, of course, nearly every ninja in the minor nations had by now. The lords of the land of grass and rice paddies had instituted a bounty system for the number of heart organs a ninja could bring in, as the bodies swiftly dissolved in their own acid. He'd separately sent Kakuzu and several white Zetsus to acquire a few, of course. A newly created ninja creature, especially one from Orochimaru's laboratories, was of great interest indeed, but the Zetsus hadn't reported in yet. Kakuzu probably was seeking out a nest, to maximize his bounty. Obito had considered the pests a marginal asset at best, but Indra's note connected the things to his mysterious assailant. The one who'd pincushioned an Uchiha with a Mangekyo Sharingan. Now, there was someone Obito wanted to recruit. But Indra hadn't provided a description or a name. Frustrating, but Obito had done more with less information. Now he knew the man existed, which meant he could be found. A man apparently so dangerous, Indra's proposed kill squad consisted entirely of Umbu rank ninja or above, including the third Hokage. The desire for Seal Masters suggested a powerful opponent indeed, but the exclusion, then reintroduction of Obito's only surviving squad mate meant something. The cloaked Uchiha sat back on the bedspread as he thought. Kakashi. Possibly Indra's close comrade, possibly something more. Obito's face twisted into something hateful. He didn't want Kakashi to move on, he wanted the man to remember what he'd done, the crimes he'd committed. The deaths of both of his teammates. Because Obito Uchiha was assuredly dead, and the man sitting inside the Uchiha estate was just a ghost. He wouldn't be anything else. Not when the plan could save the world from its own mistakes. Not when he could change everything for the better. What did loneliness matter? Madara returned to the book. Something about this house, this situation, had shoved him off his axis. And Indra wasn't even home. He needed more information, but the page had nothing more to offer, only a large blank space for future entries. Wait. Not quite empty. A small scribble at the bottom of the page. I miss them. Obito felt something begin to bubble up from within him and he crushed it before he could even tell what it was. Doubtless another form of weakness. Obito sat in silence as he digested what he'd learned. Doubtless far more than Indra would want him to, but not enough for the Akatsuki to retain a decisive advantage. He would have to send out more white Zetsus in addition to the members of Akatsuki already searching for the rings. Up until now, secrecy had been the Akatsuki's shield, low mercenary prices their sword. If Indra Uchiha knew about the Akatsuki's goals, that meant the Leaf did too. The Akatsuki would have to move fast if they wanted to capture as many Biju as possible. Obito had plans for a great many contingencies, but he wanted at least half the Biju to draw upon before starting a war. If he wanted to nip this in the bud, he would have to kill Indra Uchiha. That meant drawing him out away from Konoha. Obito closed the book and slid it back under the bed alongside the others. He carefully replaced every object he had removed and smoothed out the bedspread to boot. Only when he was sure the room was exactly as it was before he entered, did he allow the void of his Kamui to begin pulling him in. He'd learned long ago, that very few experienced ninja made mistakes. Thus, Obito forced them to do so on and off the battlefield. He would beat the brush and see how Indra Uchiha reacted. Kurama's hackles lowered only when the dark presence had moved away from the children. They were, for the moment, out of danger. Only when the presence vanished entirely did Kurama allow himself a sigh of relief and curled up to get some sleep. For the first time in decades, he was unsuccessful. They parted at the gates of the Uchiha district with a cheery and fairly drunk nod as Kakashi moved off in search of Mongooses' chakra signature. Indra slipped through the house quietly, toeing out of his sandals and throwing his cloak over the back of the couch in a still sleeping Naruto as he thought of his comfortable bed. He paused a moment as he took in the disheveled living room, a stack of movies and an empty bowl of popcorn. Sasuke had propped himself against the wall with pillows, but was deep asleep, face untroubled by nightmares thanks to the Kyuubi. Tearing his gaze away from his younger self, Indra moved down the hall, already tipping forward towards alcohol-aided oblivion and dreamless sleep. He opened the door to see a man outlined by moonlight, a dark void pulling him into a spiral shape. A single dark eye blazed red, Tomo folding out into a Mangekyo Sharingan as Indra threw himself at the man, the sound of birds splitting the midnight silence as a Chidori passed right through him and put a hole in the back wall. Indra spun to see a silver and black mask settle into place as a prideful voice emerged from the vortex pulling at a shadowy form. Normally I'd love to stay and chat, but you've given me plenty of reading material. Some other time, Indra Uchiha. Lightning speared forward, but alcohol and exhaustion slowed Indra's reaction time just enough for the void to claim his enemy. Indra released the lightning and stood in silence as he looked at his room. seemingly pristine, save for the new hole in the outer wall. Part of him wanted to scream, part of him wanted to turn the Chidori back on and keep carving through walls, but none of it would help. Indra let out a quiet, exhausted sigh and moved back through the house. He wasn't surprised when he found Mongoose's body but said a silent prayer over the man's form anyway. After storing the corpse in Ataka's room, which was the one place he was sure the children wouldn't go, Indra grabbed his naked sword from the nightstand and put his back against the couch to settle in for a hangover and a long, unbroken night watch. Inoichi Yamanaka and the rest of the Hokage's advisory council watched with interest as Indra Uchiha paced back and forth in front of Sarutobi's desk. A bag-eyed and thoroughly disheveled shadow clone had invoked Indra's status as nominal clan head to call for an emergency council meeting to inform them how deeply, absolutely fucked Konoha's barrier core was. He was in my house. Blood of the gods, both of the children were right there. It's a miracle all he stole was some intelligence and not either of them. The room was silent as the senior shinobi contemplated the potential loss of the Uchiha heir and Konoha's Jinchuriki to a Meta Uchiha ghost. Neither was a pleasant prospect. Shikaku Nara stroked his beard before he spoke. Uchiha-san, this is grave news indeed, and we share your alarm. But the intelligence files you provided us remain undisturbed inside the Hokage Tower, and the decoys placed in Umbu headquarters seem to have worked. Did you have additional files within your home you did not disclose to us? Indra's hand wrenched at his hair in frustration, but his expression betrayed volumes of guilt. A page of a personal diary, something I hid at the back of a parenting book, in a cipher of my own rediscovery. Indra reached into his cloak and produced a few torn sheets of paper, seemingly blank, which he tossed in Shikaku's direction. A visual genjutsu coupled with a special ink means only an Uchiha with the main Jikyo Sharinan could read those pages. I had assumed the few with such a capability would not think to look in a parenting book for intelligence, and if so, would not find these pages. Stupid of me. To Shikaku's right, Inoichi Yamanaka tried to soothe the Uchiha, to marginal success. Indra, all of these are fixable problems. I can help you reconfigure the barriers around the Uchiha compound, as can Master Jiraiya. The children will be safe, as will you, just tell us which intelligence has been leaked. Indeed, piped up Danzo even as Sarutobi shot his old friend a look that screamed watch your tongue Shimura. This grave vulnerability in the village's defenses must be rectified at once, if we consider the use of the transportation jutsu you described as Kamui. This Uchiha threatens valuable Konoha assets that must be removed from his reach as soon as possible. The room noticed he wasn't specifying which Uchiha and the tension mounted. Choza and Shivi were whispering together, the Akimichi and Abarame reaching some hurried agreement. Indra's only reaction was a slight thinning of his lips as his expression tightened. Most of the information is intentionally vague and self-referential, useful only to me. It reveals that my assailants who caused such grievous injuries remain at large, an unsurprising detail to Madara considering he is partially responsible. It mentions Councilman Danzo's moniker for celestial maggots and my knowledge of the Akatsuki's plans. As a result, I expect they will increase their activities, though Master Jiraiya's intelligence indicates their timetable may still be several years away. Indra gestured at the big man leaning against the wall, who nodded, his expression grave. The search for these rings are now my network's highest priority. Counselor Danzo, if you could place perhaps a dozen Umbu under my authority, it would ensure the contacts Indra-san provided remain alive long enough to point us in the right direction. Granted, said Danzo immediately. You'll have your pick of the active duty roster, provided you reinforce the Uchiha barrier today. The Hokage cleared his throat, his expression a mix of pride in his teammate and student, alongside a frustration that such cooperation was even necessary at all. Indra. The finality of those syllables drew the attention of everyone in the room. You seem to have a habit of incredible mission successes, followed by stunning lapses in judgment, and your mission record is not long enough to determine if this is cause for dismissal. Sarutobi let the last word hang in the air to emphasize the situation as a muscle in Indra's jaw twitched. As a result, you shall be confined to the village in a strictly advisory capacity on all Akatsuki-related missions. You can't dash. I can and I will, thundered the Hokage. Despite what you seem to think, you are not the only active duty ninja in this village. To assume you are the only one who can perform these tasks is part of the famous Uchiha arrogance. I trust you've opened enough battlefield graves to understand your clan's fatal flaw. Indra's hand went to his head and Inoichi winced in sympathy. Nursing a hangover like that and getting yelled at by the Hokage was only slightly less painful than getting shot in the head again. Still, he tried to intervene. Lord Hokage, if Indra provided a transcript of this intelligence, perhaps we can limit the damage. I do not believe simple knowledge that we are now aware of the Akatsuki's plans is sufficient to substantially change the enemy's operation. Therein our long-term goals remain the same, and with the warnings the Leaf Village has sent out, the other villages will doubtless guard their Jinchuriki more closely. Such a punishment is not warranted, in my opinion. Hiruzen Sarutobi visibly reined in his temper and glared at Indra, his voice back to normal conversational volume, though the tone of tempered steel remained. Inoichi's analysis has merit. You will provide his office with that transcript within the hour. He gestured Shikaka forwards and the Jonin commander rose to return the torn pages to Indra's waiting hand. Any further business? The room was silent as the various shinobi exchanged glances or shuffled in their seats, but for once, they kept their own counsel. All could sense Sarutobi was not in the mood to be subject to further debate. Danzo alone knew the true source of his friend's anger was in fact the same fear even now curling around his own withered heart. The idea an enemy could so effortlessly breach their defenses, had been in the same room as the Ninetales, and simply decided against a repeat performance of the massacre years before was bone-chilling. Not again. The Hokage clapped his hands down on the desk of ancient wood. Dismissed, get to your posts. Shinobi filed out, Indra's bowed head sandwiched between Inoichi and the massive form of Sarutobi's last loyal student. Danzo alone remained, a mix between duty and age-old stubbornness forcing him to remain despite the fact his old friend wouldn't even acknowledge his presence. The door closed with finality as Sarutobi removed the Hokage hat and fished a small orange bottle from his desk, opening it with shaking hands. He swallowed a pill and the bottle disappeared back into the desk as Danzo leaned heavier on his staff and moved towards his friend. They were both getting old. You have something to say, Shimura. He had a great many things to say, but Sarutobi wasn't in the mood to hear half of them. So Danzo chose his words carefully. Only that confining Indra Uchiha to a desk is wasting a tremendous shinobi. Whose intelligence failure is the sort of thing a Chunin would get thrown out of the force for. I don't care how good a frontline fighter he is. The man wanted a position as point operator for all Akatsuki-related operation which was half diplomat, half fighter. Bungling a fight isn't nearly as horrid as failing a diplomatic mission. I'm taking him off duty before it's Sakumo Heitake all over again. Danzo had to concede the point, but the memory of a conversation with a half-delirious Indra still pulling Root apart at the seams meant he privately doubted Sarutobi had accepted the whole picture. The Hokage had always been selectively oblivious when it came to Root, so perhaps his old friend was also avoiding that particular topic. His wizened head turned to Danzo with incredulity. Are you telling me the news the Ninetales is dream-walking the Uchiha estate didn't make you want to stick all three of them into a dark cell? You saw Kakashi's face when he made that report, it made a cynical Umbu agent actually afraid. Kakashi. The man who's been passively suicidal for years. Danzo grunted as he leaned on the Hokage's desk. I was more focused on Indra's expression, Sarutobi. He seemed to expect something like this and from what my Umbu have said, he's training all three of them in cognitive behavioral genjutsu. He's building a team that can keep the Ninetales in check, I couldn't have planned it better myself. Shimura complimenting an Uchiha, now I know he's senile, muttered Sarutobi as his friend made a rude hand gesture. Explain. Kakashi and Indra Uchiha both possess a Mangekyo Sharingan capable of binding the Ninetales, and Kakashi at least has unquestioning loyalty to the village. Indra has become emotionally attached to the boy and will protect the village if only to keep his children safe. Sasuke Uchiha possesses undeveloped Sharingan and a close personal bond with the Jinchuriki, even if it remains occasionally hostile. Pot, meat kettle, murmured the Hokage, his expression lightening as Danzo barreled on. Sakura Harino, while initially unremarkable, has shown a genius-level intelligence and, by Heitake's admission, an aptitude for genjutsu. With the Jinchuriki's blind need for acceptance, the group will ensure his loyalty to the Leaf Village in turn. On a more practical level, his seal remains undisturbed despite all this dream walking, and the Nine Tails remains unable to affect the material world. Haytake's report indicated as much. Sarutobi was silent, but Danzo had nothing more to say. You've provided an excellent reason to keep Indra within the village, you realize. If his team building is already this successful, then why split up the set by sending their Jonin sensei all across the elemental nations? His old teammate looked alarmed. His future knowledge already removed the Sound Village from the board. Just think of what he could do if you let me have him for a year. 2 years. Sarutobi, you're letting your heart overrule your head on this one. Shimura, your advice has been most useful, but no more. Not today. You are dismissed. Danzo realized this time his old friend really did want to be left alone, and so retreated towards the door with a few meaningless parting words. He did not speak until he was once more ensconced in his office below the Hokage mountain, surrounded by masked root agents. Monkey spoke first. How was the emergency meeting, sir? A knife-thin smile crossed Danzo's face as he unfurled a map of the Western Stone Desert. The Hokage has removed Indra Uchiha from contributions to foreign policy, so we have the board all to ourselves. Just as I had hoped. Soon, the agents were deep in conversation about the options available since the hated Uchiha had stripped their force of promising recruits and destabilized the minor nations in one fell swoop. A planned assault on a remote grass intelligence outpost was soon underway, and any emotion about Indra Uchiha was ruthlessly repressed. After all, what importance was a desk-bound cripple when Root's influence spanned the whole world? Check the description for the links to the author.